Under the fluorescent lights in the city's financial district, every glass tower looked honest from a distance. They reflected the morning sky, wore the sunlight like a clean conscience, and hid all their private darkness behind access cards and polished reception desks. Sophia Laurent had built much of that skyline with code, risk, and a kind of ambition that people later called genius, only because it had succeeded. But on this Monday morning, she entered one of her own subsidiaries, not as its billionaire founder, not as the unseen signature on its acquisition papers, but as a new junior operations assistant with a plain canvas tote and a second-hand grey coat. She had come to find out whether the culture praised in executive reports was real, or whether the people at the bottom were being asked to smile while swallowing humiliation. The building was called Meridian Systems, a mid-subsidiary under the Laurent Group umbrella. On brochures, it was described as agile, inclusive, innovation-driven. Those words had appeared in Sophia's quarterly reports so many times that they had begun to lose shape. Inclusive, agile, innovative. They sounded beautiful in a conference room, where coffee came in porcelain cups, and no one had to beg for a working keyboard. Sophia paused before the revolving doors and looked up. For a moment, the name on the building did not feel like hers. It felt like a stranger's house. She took a breath, lowered her eyes, and walked in. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and expensive air conditioning. At the reception desk, a young woman with perfect eyeliner looked at Sophia's coat before looking at her face. It was a small glance, not obvious enough to be accused, but precise enough to wound if one had come unprepared. "Name?" the receptionist asked. "Sophia Laurent." The receptionist's fingers paused over the keyboard for the briefest second. The name was famous enough to mean something in certain circles, but common enough in the world to be dismissed if the person in front of you did not look like the person you imagined. Billionaires, people thought, arrived in silence only when that silence was escorted. The woman searched, found the entry, and printed a visitor badge with a pale blue stripe. "New higher orientation is on the 21st floor. Elevators to your right." Her tone softened into something practiced, not kind. "You're early. I didn't want to be late." The receptionist gave a thin smile, as if punctuality were an endearing habit of people without options. Sophia pinned the badge to her coat. The plastic edge was cold against her fingers. She had worn diamond bracelets lighter than that badge, yet none had ever felt so heavy. In the elevator, she stood between a man speaking loudly into wireless earbuds and two women scrolling through messages. No one looked at her except through the reflection on the steel doors. She studied their faces in return, tired, guarded, already preparing expressions for the day ahead. At the 21st floor, the doors opened to Meridian's operations department. Fluorescent lights stretched across the ceiling in long white bars, flattening every color beneath them. The office was open plan, arranged with rows of desks broken by glass-walled meeting rooms. The space was clean, but not warm. Monitors glowed before people who sat with shoulders slightly hunched, as if the air itself had weight. Near the entrance stood a wall displaying framed values: integrity, collaboration, excellence, courage. Sophia's gaze lingered on the last word. Courage, she thought, was usually printed on walls by people who did not expect to need it. A woman in a cream blouse and narrow black skirt approached with a tablet tucked against her rib. Her smile was bright and empty around the edges. "You must be Sophia," she said. "Yes, good morning. Marissa Val, Senior Operations Coordinator. I'll be settling you in." Sophia knew the name. She had read it in staff directories, attached to performance summaries filled with words like efficient, assertive, indispensable. No one had written feared, though Sophia suspected that her mission had less to do with truth than with survival. Marissa looked her over. Her eyes rested on Sophia's worn flats, the simple tote, the inexpensive watch deliberately chosen from a small shop far away from any luxury district. First office job? Marissa asked. Sophia smiled gently. Not exactly. How mysterious. Marissa's tone made it clear that mystery, from someone without visible importance, was merely pretension. Well, we move fast here. People who need too much hand-holding usually don't last. A few nearby employees lifted their heads just slightly. Not enough to appear interested, but enough to listen. I'll do my best to learn quickly, Sophia said. That's what they all say. Marissa tapped her tablet. Come on. As they walked through the department, Sophia felt the quiet hierarchy reveal itself, without anyone needing to explain. Desks near the windows belonged to those with seniority, or at least proximity to power. Junior employees sat closer to the copy room and supply cabinets, where the printer shrieked and the foot traffic never ended. Some chairs were expensive ergonomic models. Others, including the one at the empty desk Marissa stopped beside, had armrests repaired with black tape. This will be yours, Marissa said. The desk had no drawers. The monitor was older than the others and tilted faintly to the left. A sticky residue marked one corner where someone had pulled away a label too. Quickly. Sophia set down her tote with care. Your login should work by now. If it doesn't, submit a ticket. It usually ignores new people for 2 days, so don't take it personally. Marissa's smile sharpened. Unless you give them a reason to. Sophia glanced around. Several people were watching openly now. A woman with auburn hair near the aisle gave her a sympathetic look, then quickly returned to her screen when Marissa turned. Another man sat 2 desks away, sleeves rolled to his forearms, dark hair falling slightly over his brow as he compared 2 spreadsheets. He did not stare. He only looked once, briefly, with the kind of attention that noticed without consuming. Then he reached under his desk, pulled out a spare adapter, and placed it quietly on the empty space between their stations. For the monitor, he said, not loudly. This one flickers if the cable is loose. Marissa's gaze snapped toward him. Ethan, if you have so much spare time, I can send you the reconciliation backlog. Ethan did not react except to straighten one column on his screen. I'm on the vendor compliance file you asked for. Then perhaps focus on that. He nodded, calm and unreadable. Sophia saw in that small exchange a practiced restraint, not weakness, not submission exactly. The discipline of someone who had learned the cost of answering back. Thank you, Sophia said softly. Ethan's eyes met hers for 1 second. Warm brown, steady tired, in a way youth had no right to be. No problem. Marissa resumed the tour with renewed briskness. The kitchen was shown with a warning, not to use mugs from the top shelf, because those belonged to people. The supply cabinet was opened only long enough for Sophia to see that the better notebooks and pens were stored on a higher shelf. Behind a box labeled Executive Client Materials, the smaller meeting rooms could be booked by anyone, Marissa said, though her emphasis made it obvious that anyone did not include everyone. At 9:30, the department gathered around the central table for the morning briefing. Sophia stood at the edge with a company-issued notebook that had 3 pages already torn out. Mr. Bennett, the department manager, arrived 5 minutes late, carrying a coffee from the executive cafe downstairs. He was a broad man with silver temples and a voice smooth from years of saying nothing directly. Team, he began. We have several priorities this week. Client migration review, cost efficiency audit, and the board summary for Q2 operational exposure. Sophia listened carefully. She knew the projects from a strategic level, but here they sounded different. Less like initiatives, more like burdens being passed from hand to hand until they landed on the person least able to refuse. Marissa stood beside Bennett, tablet ready, nodding before he finished each sentence. Victor will lead the exposure summary, Bennett said, gesturing toward a man in an expensive navy suit who leaned against the table with casual ownership. Marissa will coordinate data collection, Everyone else support as needed. Victor Hale smiled as if support were a natural resource he had discovered. We'll need clean numbers this time, he said. No amateur formatting, no delays. Some of us have to present these reports upstairs. The word upstairs moved through the room like weather. It meant authority, judgment, danger. Sophia almost smiled at the irony. Upstairs ultimately meant her, but here no one knew that. Here the word could be used like a stick. Marissa turned towards Sophia. And since we have fresh energy joining us, Sophia can start by compiling the vendor discrepancy list from last quarter. A faint murmur passed through the group. Sophia caught it. Though no one spoke clearly, the auburn-haired woman looked up again. Brows knitting, Bennett barely glanced at Sophia. Good, a simple starter task. Ethan's fingers stopped on his keyboard. Sophia understood from the room's reaction that simple did not mean simple. After the briefing dissolved, Marissa dropped a stack of printed files onto Sophia's desk. It landed with a slap that made her monitor tremble. Vendor discrepancies, Marissa said. Cross-check these against the internal database. Flag missing approvals, reconcile amounts, and summarize patterns by category. Sophia opened the top folder. The pages were out of order. Some invoices had handwritten notes. Others had missing dates. Several vendor names were abbreviated inconsistently. It was a messy job, but not impossible. She had built systems to untangle worse. When is it due? Sophia asked. End of day. A few nearby employees went still. Sophia looked up. Today? Marissa tilted her head. Is that a problem? It depends on database access and file completeness. How careful? But around here, we solve problems instead of explaining them. Marissa's voice lifted just enough for others to hear. Don't worry, we don't expect perfection on day one. There it was, the kindness-shaped blade. Sophia felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. Not fear, recognition. This was how a person was made small. Not through one dramatic cruelty, but through 100 little arrangements designed to prove failure before work had even begun. Give someone broken tools. Set an impossible clock. Place witnesses nearby. Then call the outcome evidence. She had read engagement surveys from this subsidiary. She had seen words like fast-paced, challenging, growth-oriented. She wondered how many people had typed those answers, while afraid their manager would trace the response back to them. She wondered how many had learned to describe injury as opportunity. Around noon, Sophia discovered her login allowed access only to current month files. The old vendor database required manager approval. She submitted a request and received an automated message estimating resolution within 48 hours. Marissa passed by 15 minutes later, still on the first batch. I need access to last quarter database. Oh, that you should have requested it earlier. I submitted the request as soon as I found the restriction. Marissa's smile never moved. Planning ahead is part of the job. After she walked away, Ethan rolled his chair slightly closer without looking directly at Sophia. There's a read-only archive through the compliance portal, he said under his breath. No one tells new hires because the interface is terrible. Search by vendor tax ID, not name. Names are inconsistent. Sophia glanced at him. Will that get you in trouble? Only if someone admits they made the task impossible. His tone was dry, but not cruel. She felt the first unexpected warmth of the day loosen the tightness in her chest. Thank you, Ethan. He gave a small nod. Save versions every 20 minutes. The system crashes when exporting. Then he moved back to his desk before kindness could be seen long enough to be punished. The afternoon blurred into fluorescent glare, spreadsheet cells, and the stale smell of reheated food from the kitchen. Sophia worked quickly, faster than anyone expected. But she also forced herself to make mistakes a true newcomer might make. Not foolish ones, human ones. She watched who interrupted, who ignored, who helped only when it benefited them. She watched Marissa circle the department like a beautifully dressed hawk. Once, Sophia passed the copy room and heard two employees whispering. Marissa always does this. Poor thing won't last a month. Better her than us. Sophia stopped just beyond the doorway, unseen. Better her than us. The words stayed with her longer than the insult would have. Not because they were cruel, but because they were tired. These were not villains speaking. These were people trained by fear to preserve themselves by watching someone else drown. For the first time since she had decided to go undercover, Sophia felt the full weight of her own distance from this place. From the top, a toxic culture looked like a management issue, a performance risk, a line item in need of correction. From this desk, under these lights, it felt like weather inside the lungs. By 5 o'clock, she had completed a partial reconciliation and identified 3 suspicious patterns. Duplicate vendor IDs, approvals routed through inactive managers, and unusual payment splits just under review thresholds. Her pulse sharpened when she saw Victor Hale's initials attached to several routing notes. Not proof. Not yet, but smoke perhaps. She was still reviewing the final category when Marissa appeared behind her. Well, Sophia turned. I have a partial summary. Some records were incomplete, and database restrictions slowed verification. I flagged several items that may require deeper review. Partial, Marissa repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. Victor, who had been passing by, paused. Already struggling, Sophia kept her expression calm. The dataset contains inconsistencies that should be clarified before presentation. Victor laughed softly. That's a very polished way to say you couldn't finish. The office quieted. Sophia felt every pair of eyes on her. She could end this now. One phone call. One sentence to the board. One revealed truth. And this room would rearrange itself around her like iron filings around a magnet. But if she used power too soon, she would only learn how they treated power. She needed to learn how they treated the powerless. Marissa folded her arms. Tomorrow morning, we have the cross-department update. Since Sophia has identified such important concerns, she can present the full vendor discrepancy analysis herself. Ethan looked up sharply. Sophia's fingers rested on the edge of her desk. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, Marissa said brightly. Conference room A, Mr. Bennett, Victor, Finance Compliance. Everyone relevant. That analysis requires complete access, validation, and historical comparison. Then I suggest you manage your time well. Victor smiled. Welcome to Meridian. Marissa leaned closer, lowering her voice only enough to make the cruelty feel intimate rather than hidden. You wanted to prove you belonged here, didn't you? Sophia looked at the stack of disordered files, the restricted database, the corrupted exports, the names no one dared say too loudly under the fluorescent lights. The office seemed suddenly less like a workplace and more like a machine designed to teach silence. Its gears were polished manners, impossible deadlines, stolen credit, and the quiet relief of those not chosen today. And now she had been chosen. Marissa straightened and addressed the department with theatrical ease. Everyone, please make sure to attend tomorrow's update. Sophia will walk us through her findings. A few people lowered their eyes. Lena Ortiz, the auburn-haired woman, looked angry but afraid. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sophia sat very still. The company she had built from above had become, down here, a place where the weak were trained to stay silent. And her supervisor had just handed her an impossible task in front of everyone. Not to test her ability, but to make sure her failure had an audience. By 9 the next morning, Sophia had learned that humiliation in an office did not arrive like a storm. It arrived as a calendar invite. It arrived as a shared folder with broken permissions, a spreadsheet no one had maintained for 8 months, and a polite message from Marissa sent to the entire department at 7:42 a.m. Looking forward to Sophia's update today. Let's all give her space to demonstrate ownership. Ownership. Sophia stood in front of the coffee machine with her paper cup warming her hands and read the message twice. Around her, the morning office moved with its practiced rhythm. The low hum of printers, the artificial brightness of fluorescent panels, the soft clicking of keyboards from people who knew how to look busy before managers walked in. No one spoke to her directly, but silence had its own language. A junior analyst glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Two women near the pantry stopped talking when she stepped closer. Someone laughed from the direction of Marissa's desk, not loudly enough to be accused of cruelty, but not quietly enough to be innocent. Sophia took one sip of the coffee. It tasted burnt. For most of her adult life, she had walked into rooms where people straightened their posture before she even spoke. Investors lowered their voices when she questioned projections. Executives praised her insight before they knew whether her idea was practical. Journalists called her visionary, when what they really meant was rich enough to be forgiven for being difficult. Here, no one feared disappointing her. Here they believed she was disposable, it should have been useful. That was why she had come. To observe without the distortion of power, to feel the company from the bottom floor, where policies became habits and slogans became bruises. But knowing the purpose of pain did not make it painless. By 10, her screen was filled with red error notices. The file Marissa had assigned contained quarterly vendor reconciliation data, historical procurement adjustments, and internal approval logs from departments that had renamed their categories 3 times in one fiscal year. Some records came from an archived platform. Others referenced access keys she did not have. Several exported columns had shifted during conversion, causing vendor names to appear under approval dates and invoice amounts to sit inside comment fields like misplaced accusations. Sophia could have solved it in an hour with executive credentials. She did not use them. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard as a familiar instinct rose inside her. Clean, efficient, lethal. One call to corporate security, one request to the private audit team, one quiet order, and every restricted file in this subsidiary would open before her like a confession. Instead, she copied the error code into a blank document and began tracing the problem manually. Behind her, Marissa's heels tapped closer. "How's our special project going?" Sophia kept her gaze on the screen. "I'm mapping the corrupted fields first." "Oh," Marissa leaned down slightly, her perfume sharp and expensive. "That sounds very thorough." A man at the next row gave a small cough that was almost a laugh. Sophia turned one page of notes over and wrote a new column heading. If Marissa wanted panic, she would not receive it for free. "I'll need access to the October archived approvals," Sophia said evenly. "The current export references records not included in the shared folder." Marissa smiled as if Sophia had performed exactly as expected. Everyone manages with the resources available to them. Part of working here is being adaptable. Inaccurate source data will affect the update. Then I hope your explanation is very convincing. The words were delivered pleasantly. The damage was not. When Marissa walked away, the man at the next row, Derek, from procurement support, rolled his chair back just enough to glance at Sophia's monitor. "You're still on the vendor crosswalk?" he asked. "Wow." Sophia did not answer. He grinned toward another colleague. "I did tell Marissa this might be a little advanced." The other colleague, Nina, tilted her head with theatrical sympathy. "Don't worry. We all had rough first weeks." "Well, maybe not this rough." Sophia felt that heat crawl up her neck, but her face remained calm. She had negotiated hostile acquisitions with men who smiled through threats. She had sat across from bankers who believed youth and femininity were weaknesses until the contract left them no room to breathe. Yet this was different. Those battles had been fought from a chair of authority. This one required her to swallow. She returned to the spreadsheet. For the next 2 hours, she worked through the errors one by one. she found that the corrupted vendor names were not random. They followed a pattern linked to regional codes. She built a temporary matching table, corrected several hundred entries, and identified 23 invoices duplicated under different supplier IDs. It was minor progress, not enough to clear the whole file, but enough to prove the mess had structure. For the first time that day, Sophia felt a thin thread of satisfaction. She printed a short summary and left it beside her keyboard while she went to retrieve another batch of scanned approvals from the copier. When she returned, the page was gone. At Marissa's desk, Derek was speaking loudly enough for the nearby team to hear. "I noticed the regional code issue in the vendor file," he said, tapping a sheet of paper with one finger. "If we build a crosswalk, we can clean up part of the duplication before the update." Marissa looked pleased. "Good catch, Derek. That's exactly the kind of initiative we need." Sophia stopped. For 1 second, the entire office sharpened. The white light, the grey carpet, the corner of the stolen page visible under Derek's hand. It was such a small theft, not a patent, not a company, not the kind of betrayal that made headlines. Just 1 page, just 2 hours. Just enough to teach a person that effort without power could be taken and renamed. Lena Ortiz, sitting by the window, saw Sophia's expression and looked her jaw tight. She knew. Perhaps everyone knew. That was the worst part. Theft did not require secrecy here. It required only confidence that no one would object. Sophia walked back to her desk without speaking. Inside her, something cold and precise recorded the moment. Derek, procurement support, comfortable stealing in public. Marissa enabling. She added their names to the mental ledger she had been building since the first day. But the human part of her, the part Aunt Claire, always warned her not to leave unattended, aged more than she expected. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion blurred the numbers on the screen. The update meeting had been moved from 4 to 3:30. Marissa announced it with a bright voice, as if earlier failure were more efficient. Sophia's temporary table stopped working at row 1842. A formula she had used to realign approval codes began returning false matches. Then the pivot summary collapsed. Vendor totals doubled, then tripled. A figure that should have been $4.8 million became $14.6 million. Her pulse slowed in the way it did when danger became real. This was not just an error. If she presented this, Marissa could accuse her of incompetence. If she corrected it without access, she needed to find the broken logic within 30 minutes. If she revealed her identity, she would lose the entire purpose of coming here. And worse, everyone would behave well only because the owner had entered the room. Sophia leaned closer, scanning the formula. The noise around her seemed to rise. "Is she frozen?" Nina whispered. "I think the spreadsheet won," Derek murmured. Someone laughed again. Sophia's hand tightened around the mouse. Then a quiet voice came from her left. "Your lookup is catching partial codes." She turned. Ethan stood beside her desk, holding a stack of folders against his chest. He was not imposing, not dressed to impress. His shirt sleeves were rolled once at the wrist, his tie slightly loosened, his expression calm in a way that did not demand attention. Sophia had noticed him before, mostly because he noticed too much. He rarely joined the office laughter. He moved through the department like someone who had learned where the floorboards creaked. He looked at her screen, not at her face. "The archived system used 4-digit region tags," he said softly. "The newer system uses 6. If you match from the left without separating legacy vendors, it pulls the wrong approvals." Sophia stared at the formula. "He was right." "How do you know that?" she asked. He hesitated as if the truthful answer had weight. "I've cleaned this file before." There was something beneath the words, not pride, not complaint, just a fact wrapped in restraint. Sophia lowered her voice. "Was there documentation?" "No." "Of course." The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. There's a hidden tab in the export sometimes. Not always. Try unhiding sheets. Sophia did. Nothing appeared. Ethan shifted the folders to one arm and reached toward the keyboard, then stopped before touching it. May I? It was such a small courtesy that it almost hurt. All day, people had taken her time, her work, her dignity, without asking. Ethan asked before pressing a key. Sophia nodded. He leaned in and used a sequence of shortcuts faster than most analysts she had seen in senior strategy reviews. He opened the name manager, traced an old range, and found a broken reference pointing to a sheet that had been removed from the visible workbook, but not from the data model. Then he showed her how to extract the legacy vendor list from the connection properties. Not fixed, not magically solved, but possible. You split these first, he said, pointing. Legacy vendors here, current vendors there. Then match approvals after standardizing the region tag. Don't let Marissa rush you into presenting totals. Present exception categories instead. It makes the missing access the issue, not you. Sophia looked at him, then really looked. There was no eagerness in his face, no delight at being needed. He spoke like someone who had rescued too many things quietly and learned not to expect gratitude. His intelligence was not decorative. It was worn down at the edges from use, like a tool kept in a drawer no one admitted belonged to him. You should be leading this update, she said before she could stop herself. Ethan's hands paused. For a moment the office noise thinned. Then he straightened and stepped back. That's not how things work here. Maybe that's the problem. His eyes met hers. They were steady, dark, and tired in a way that made her chest ache. He did not know who she was. He did not know that she could change how things worked with a signature, a call, a board resolution. He only saw a new employee cornered by a system designed to make her fail, and he had chosen carefully, quietly, to stand beside her for a few minutes, not because she was powerful, because she was there. Sophia felt something inside her loosen. It was dangerous, that feeling. Warmth in a hostile place. Recognition without transaction. A hand extended with no invoice attached. Thank you, she said. Ethan looked away first. Don't thank me yet, you still have 20 minutes. That almost made her laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was the first thing all day that did not feel sharpened against her. They worked without making it obvious. Ethan returned to his desk, but sent one brief message through the internal chat with a corrected formula and 3 words: use exception logic. Sophia followed his guidance. The numbers stopped screaming. The file was still incomplete, still ugly, still evidence of a department held together by hidden labor and public blame. But now she could stand in the update meeting and say what was missing, what was corrupted, and what controls had failed. She could turn Marissa's trap into a mirror. At 3:20, Sophia printed the revised summary. This time she kept it in her hand. As she stood, she felt a presence behind her. Lena Ortiz had approached quietly, carrying a blue folder against her chest. Up close, her face looked kind but guarded, like someone who had survived by measuring every word before releasing it. I saw what happened with Derek, Lena said. Sophia waited. And I saw Ethan helping you. Sophia's fingers tightened slightly around the papers. He pointed out a formula issue. Lena glanced toward Ethan's desk. He was bent over his own work again, invisible by choice or by training. He's good at that, Lena said, pointing out issues other people get promoted for solving. There was no bitterness in her tone, only a fatigue that made it worse. Sophia studied her. Why are you telling me? Lena's eyes returned to hers, and for the first time Sophia saw not fear exactly, but the careful compassion of someone trying to warn a stranger away from a cliff. Because Marissa doesn't just punish the person who fails, Lena said quietly. She punishes whoever makes failure harder to arrange. The office lights buzzed overhead. Across the room, Marissa laughed at something Derek said, bright and satisfied, already preparing for the meeting she believed would end with Sophia diminished. Lena lowered her voice further. If people see you relying on Ethan, they'll use him to hurt you, and they'll use you to hurt him. That's how politics works here. Sophia looked once more at Ethan. He did not look up, but somehow she felt certain he knew they were speaking about him. For the first time in days, she had felt seen not as a burden, not as an outsider to be tested, not as a poor girl to be mocked, but as a person worth helping. And now, before she could even understand the fragile warmth of that, someone was telling her it had a cost. Lena stepped back as the meeting reminder chimed across every screen. "Be careful, Sophia," she said. "In this office, kindness is never treated as neutral." The meeting room was called Aurora, though nothing about it suggested dawn. It was a narrow glass box set near the center of the floor, where everyone passing by could see who was speaking, who was silent, who was being praised, and who was being slowly cut open under professional lighting. The table was long enough to create distance, but not long enough to hide discomfort. Sophia took the chair closest to the door because no one had told her where to sit. And in places like this, she was learning the absence of instruction was often a trap. Marissa entered last. She always did. Not late enough to be reprimanded, but late enough for everyone to notice that the room waited for her. Her cream blazer was perfectly pressed, her tablet tucked under one arm, her smile light and polished, as if the tension in the office had nothing to do with her. Derek followed behind, with 2 coffees, one of which he placed in front of Marissa without being asked. Sophia watched that small movement and understood, more than she wished to. In this office, usefulness was not measured by competence alone. It was measured by how well one orbited power. Mr. Bennett sat at the head of the table, a middle manager with tired eyes, and a voice trained to sound calm even when avoiding responsibility. Victor Hale stood near the screen, clicking through slides with the ease of a man who believed every room already belonged to him. Ethan came in quietly, carrying a worn notebook and a folder of printed documents. He did not sit beside Sophia. Instead, he chose a chair 2 seats away, close enough to notice, far enough not to make her more visible. That distance hurt her in a way she could not name. It was not rejection. It was protection, and the fact that she understood that made it worse. The meeting began with numbers, quarterly client retention, response times, platform transition updates. At the parent company level, Sophia had seen these figures arranged into elegant dashboards, summarized by executives who talked about strategy and scalable culture. Here, under the fluorescent lights, the same numbers looked different. They had fingerprints on them. Fear, exhaustion, people staying late to repair errors they had not made, people smiling at those who stole from them because rent was due at the end of the month. Victor pointed to a red-marked section on the screen. As you can see, the Northbridge client packet was delayed by 12 hours, which placed additional pressure on the integration team. We need to address process discipline at the junior level. At the junior level. Sophia felt the sentence turn its head toward her before anyone looked. Marissa sighed softly, a sound of regret so delicately performed that it almost became art. "I hate to bring this up in a group setting," she said, bringing it up in a group setting with practiced grace. But the packet was assigned to Sophia for preliminary formatting. I did mention yesterday that accuracy and timeliness are not optional here. Several eyes shifted, not all cruel, some simply relieved. Relieved it was not them. Sophia kept her hands folded on the table. "I completed the formatting by 6:40 and uploaded it to the shared folder." Marissa tilted her head. "The final packet wasn't submitted until after midnight. I don't control the final submission. No one said you did." Marissa's smile thinned. "But when one part of a process is unstable, everything downstream suffers." It was beautifully vague, a sentence built like smoke, impossible to grab, easy to inhale. Sophia looked at Mr. Bennett. He adjusted his glasses and glanced down at his printed agenda. "We're not here to assign blame," he said, in the exact tone of a man preparing to assign blame. "But we do need accountability." Sophia felt something cold settle in her chest. Accountability, in the mouths of weak leaders, often meant sacrifice. Victor clicked to the next slide. There it was, a timeline of the Northbridge deliverable. Sophia saw her name in yellow beside initial preparation, followed by several blank spaces where names should have been. The delay was marked after her step, but the visual design made it seem as if everything began with her. Whoever had made the slide understood implication better than honesty. Derek leaned back in his chair. "Maybe it's just a training issue. She's new." A few people chuckled, softly enough to deny it later. Sophia looked at the screen and thought of the global compliance reports sitting in encrypted folders on her private server. She thought of the acquisitions she had negotiated across 3 continents, of boardrooms where men twice her age had mistaken her silence for uncertainty until she signed away their leverage with a fountain pen. She could end this now. She could stand up, speak one sentence, and watch every face in this room rearrange itself around terror. But she had not come here to be feared. She had come here to learn what fear had done to everyone else. So she breathed once and said, "May I ask who owned the final submission?" The room quieted by half a degree. Victor's eyes moved toward her, not sharply. That would have been too revealing, just enough to show irritation. "The process is collaborative," he said. "Of course, but the submission credential would identify the uploader." Marissa's smile disappeared for less than a second. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat. "Sophia, I appreciate the initiative, but this isn't a courtroom." "No," Ethan said quietly. Everyone turned. He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. There were people whose speech entered a room like a chair being dragged across the floor. Ethan's entered like a hand placed firmly on a table. "It isn't a courtroom," he continued, "but the system logs are clear." Sophia did not look at him at first. She looked at the reactions around him. Derek's eyebrows lifted. Lena, sitting near the far corner, went very still. Marissa's fingers tightened around her stylus. Victor stopped clicking. Ethan opened his folder. "I pulled the access history this morning because the client ticket reopened twice overnight." Sophia uploaded the formatted packet at 6:42 p.m. Marissa reviewed it at 7:18. Derek downloaded it at 7:31. The final submission didn't occur until 12:26 a.m. from Victor's admin account. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with things no one wanted, said aloud. Victor smiled. "I asked operations to route it through my account because we were having permission issues." Ethan nodded once, as if he had expected that. There weren't permission errors recorded. Mr. Bennett shifted in his seat. Marissa gave a small laugh. "Ethan, are we really going to derail a team meeting with technical minutiae?" "Technical minutiae delayed the client packet," Ethan said. "It was not defiance exactly. That was what made it dangerous. He was not emotional, he was not rude. He was simply accurate, and accuracy had a way of insulting people who survived by distortion." Sophia finally looked at him. Under the glassy office light, Ethan seemed almost too ordinary at first glance. Simple shirt, tired eyes, pen tucked between 2 fingers. Nothing about him demanded attention, and perhaps that was why the company had managed not to give it to him. But his documents were organized with devastating precision. His timeline corrected not only the accusation but the architecture behind it. He had not merely defended her. He had understood the game, mapped it, and chosen the cleanest place to cut through. A strange warmth moved through Sophia, followed immediately by anger, not at him. For him. How many times had he done this? How many crises had he quietly prevented? How many stolen messes had he repaired? How many careless superiors had walked away spotless because Ethan knew the system well enough to save them and lacked the protection to expose them? Victor's gaze cooled. "Ethan," he said, voice still pleasant, Your dedication to log details is appreciated, but we also need people who understand broader business context. There it was, the punishment wrapped in compliment. Ethan lowered his eyes to the paper. Understood. Sophia wanted him to look up again, wanted him not to retreat into that practiced invisibility. But he closed the folder, and she saw how familiar the motion was. Not surrender, survival. Mr. Bennet moved quickly to the next agenda item, as if speed could erase discomfort. The meeting resumed, but its rhythm had changed. People spoke more carefully. Marissa stopped smiling at Sophia and began ignoring her with a precision more chilling than open hostility. Derek did not make another joke. Victor continued presenting, but every so often his glance passed over Ethan like a blade checking the edge of something. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped back in subdued disorder. Sophia gathered her notes slowly. She knew better than to approach Ethan too openly now. Lena's warning still lived beneath her skin. Kindness was not neutral here. Documentation was not neutral. Truth was not neutral. But before she could leave, Marissa stepped close enough that her perfume covered the scent of the room. "You're very lucky," Marissa said softly. Sophia met her eyes. "Am I? Some people enjoy playing hero for lost causes." Marissa's gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan, who was speaking with Lena near the door. But heroes get tired and lost causes usually stay lost. Sophia's expression remained calm. She had spent years learning calmness from lawyers, investors, journalists, and men who smiled while underestimating her. But this calm felt different. It was no longer armor for herself alone. It was becoming a container for something sharper. "Thank you for the advice," she said. Marissa's mouth curved. It wasn't advice. She left. The day did not improve after that. It narrowed. Assignments arrived without context. A client response thread that should have included 3 departments was forwarded only to Sophia with the note, "Handle urgently." A spreadsheet appeared in her queue with corrupted formulas and a deadline of 40 minutes. Derek asked loudly if she knew how to freeze panes in Excel, then laughed before she answered. No one directly accused her of incompetence again. That would have been too obvious after the meeting. Instead, they made competence harder to prove. By late afternoon, Sophia had begun to see the office as a machine with invisible gears. Praise flowed upward and blame flowed downward. Those with status made decisions. Those without status became evidence. Mistakes did not belong to whoever caused them. They belonged to whoever could least afford to deny them. Ethan passed her desk once and placed a sticky note on the edge of a file without stopping. "Check column J against archived version before sending." That was all. No smile, no conversation, no rescue dramatic enough to be noticed. Sophia opened the archived version and found the discrepancy he had warned her about. A formula had been altered to inflate projected completion rates. Not enough to be obvious, enough to mislead a client, enough, perhaps, to create another failure later with her name attached. She corrected the file, saved a copy, and sent it with a neutral note. Across the office, Ethan did not look at her, but she saw his shoulders loosen slightly. It was such a small thing, that loosening, smaller than gratitude, quieter than trust. Yet Sophia felt it enter her heart with unreasonable force. She had known powerful men who performed generosity for cameras. She had known executives who donated millions and terrorized assistants. She had known heirs who spoke of loyalty and discarded people like used napkins. But Ethan, who had so little visible power, spent what he had carefully: a warning, a record, a fact placed between a person and harm. Why had no one lifted him higher? The question stayed with her until evening. At 6:10, most employees were still at their desks, though the official workday had ended at 5:30. No one said they were afraid to leave before Marissa. They simply remained, clicking, typing, pretending devotion was voluntary. Sophia was preparing to shut down when an email arrived from Mr. Bennet. Please come to my office. No greeting, no context. She stood, feeling several eyes follow her. Marissa did not look up, but her stillness was too complete to be natural. Ethan's hand paused over his keyboard. For 1 second, Sophia allowed herself to meet his gaze. There was warning in it. And something else. Concern, restrained so tightly, it almost looked like distance. Mr. Bennett's office was small but private, which made it more dangerous than the glass meeting room. Victor was already there, standing beside the window with his phone in hand. Marissa sat in one of the visitor chairs, legs crossed, expression composed. Sophia remained standing because no one invited her to sit. Mr. Bennett folded his hands on the desk. Sophia, we've had a difficult day. She said nothing. The Northbridge issue created visibility beyond this team, he continued. Client leadership is asking questions. Internally, we need to show that we've addressed the breakdown. Sophia looked from him to Victor, then to Marissa. The arrangement was clear. They were not investigating the mistake. They were staging its burial. I provided my work on time, Sophia said evenly. Victor slipped his phone into his pocket. This isn't about one timestamp. It's about professional maturity, Marissa added, almost gently. Sometimes when you're new, the best thing you can do is take responsibility and learn from it. Sophia felt the absurdity of it pressed at responsibility. Learn from it, as if truth were arrogance and submission were growth. Mr. Bennett pushed a printed document across the desk. It was a corrective action statement. Her name was already typed at the top. The paragraph beneath said she acknowledged mishandling the Northbridge packet, failing to escalate delays, and causing reputational risk to the team. There was a blank line for her signature. For a moment, the office seemed to fall away. Sophia heard only the fluorescent hum above her, the same thin mechanical sound that had followed her through every humiliation since she entered this place. She thought of the employees outside who had signed documents like this because they needed health insurance, because they had children, because they did not have secret wealth, private attorneys, or the luxury of righteous refusal. She thought of Ethan closing his folder after telling the truth, already knowing truth would not protect him. Mr. Bennett's voice softened, which made it worse. If you sign this, we can treat it as a training matter. Sophia looked at the paper. And if I don't? Victor smiled without warmth. Mr. Bennett leaned back, regret arranged carefully across his face. Then we'll have to consider whether your position here is a good fit. Refusal to accept accountability is serious, Sophia. I would think very carefully before making this harder than it needs to be. Sophia had signed documents worth billions with less hesitation. Acquisition agreements, emergency funding approvals, severance packages for executives who had mistaken arrogance for genius. Her signature had once moved markets before breakfast. It had appeared in newspapers, on encrypted contracts, beneath statements drafted by people who believed power was a language only the powerful could read. But now, under the cheap fluorescent lights of a subsidiary conference room, with a ballpoint pen that skipped on the first stroke, her hand felt strangely human, not weak. Human. Mr. Bennett watched her as if waiting for the small satisfaction of obedience. Victor Hale stood near the window, one hand in his pocket, face turned slightly aside, so his smile could pretend to be professional. Marissa had not been invited into the room, but Sophia could almost feel her presence beyond the glass walls, hovering in the office air like perfume too sweet to breathe. Sophia looked at the statement one more time. Negligence, delay, reputational risk. The words were lies dressed as procedure. For one suspended second, she imagined what would happen if she let the mask fall. She could place the pen down. She could lift her eyes and ask Mr. Bennett whether he preferred to resign privately or be removed publicly. She could call Laurent Global's legal counsel. She could have Victor's access logs frozen within 5 minutes. She could make every person in this room understand that they had not cornered a frightened junior employee. They had insulted the owner of the building. The thought rose clean and sharp inside her. It would have been easy, too easy, and that was why she did not do it. Because if she used power now, she would learn only how cowards behaved when they were afraid. She would not learn how they behaved when they believed no one important was watching. She would not learn how many Sophias had sat in this same chair without a secret name, without an escape door, without wealth waiting beneath their silence like a hidden blade. So she breathed in slowly. Then she signed. The pen left a dark line across the bottom of the page. Sophia Laurent, written in a modest hand. No flourish, no declaration, just ink, just control. Mr. Bennet's shoulders relaxed, almost imperceptibly. Victor's smile widened by a fraction. Good, Mr. Bennet said, sliding the paper toward himself as if collecting evidence instead of shame. I'm glad you chose to be reasonable. Sophia folded her hands in her lap. I chose to understand the process, she said quietly. Victor looked at her then, and for a moment something passed between them. Not fear, not yet. Irritation, perhaps. The mild displeasure of a man who realized his target had not broken in the expected way. You'll be assigned corrective follow-up, Mr. Bennet continued. Marissa will supervise your improvement plan. Of course she would. Sophia nodded once. Thank you for clarifying. The words tasted like ice, but she let them remain polite. When she stepped out of the conference room, the office noise returned too loudly. Keyboards, printers, the soft ringing of desk phones no one wanted to answer. Several people glanced up and then away, their curiosity disciplined by survival. Lena Ortiz from accounting looked at Sophia over the rim of her monitor, and the concern in her eyes was small but unmistakable. Marissa stood near the coffee station with a paper cup in hand, holding court among two junior analysts and a project coordinator who laughed too quickly at everything she said. When Sophia passed, Marissa's gaze dropped to the folder in her hand. Oh, she said lightly. All done? Sophia stopped. It would have been simple to ignore her. It would have been satisfying to answer sharply. Instead, Sophia turned her face toward Marissa with a calm that made the other woman's expression tightened. Yes, Sophia said, done. Marissa tilted her head. Good. Accountability is such an important lesson early in one's career. Sophia held her gaze. It is, she said, especially when it's documented properly. For the first time that day, Marissa did not have an immediate reply. Sophia walked back to her desk while the back of her neck burned. She could endure humiliation when she chose it. That did not make it painless. Every restrained word had weight. Every polite answer was a stone placed carefully inside her chest. She sat down, opened her laptop, and found 3 new tasks assigned by Marissa, all marked urgent, all due before morning. One involved reconciling corrupted client data that should have taken a team a full day. Another required formatting a presentation using files she had not been granted access to. The third asked her to summarize vendor performance over 6 quarters, using a database no one had trained her to use. A beautiful little cage, built from deadlines. Across the room, Ethan looked up from his workstation. He did not stare in the way others did. He did not offer pity from a safe distance. His gaze found the stack of work on her screen, then her face, then the closed door of the conference room. Something in his expression changed, not surprise, but recognition, as if he had heard the shape of that silence before. The afternoon passed with a kind of cruel efficiency. Marissa sent clarification emails that clarified nothing. Victor copied department heads on messages asking whether Sophia needed additional support with basic responsibilities. Mr. Bennet stayed inside his office. No one mentioned the signed statement, but it moved invisibly through the day, altering the temperature around her. By 6:30, the office began to empty. By 7:15, only the people with too much to prove or too little power remained. Sophia was still at her desk, sleeves rolled slightly, hair tucked behind one ear, when Ethan appeared beside her with 2 vending machine coffees. He placed one near her keyboard. "It tastes terrible," he said, "but it's warm and sometimes that's enough." Sophia looked at the cup. Something about the plainness of the gesture touched her more than it should have. No performance, no demand to be noticed, just terrible coffee, offer without ceremony. "Thank you," she said. Ethan pulled a chair from the empty desk beside hers and sat not too close, not too far. Respect lived in distances like that. "I saw the improvement tasks," he said. Sophia's fingers paused above the keyboard. "Did everyone?" "No, Marissa forgot the shared assignment board isn't as private as she thinks." Despite herself, Sophia almost smiled. Ethan leaned forward and pointed at her screen. "This first one isn't really about analysis. It's about knowing which data not to trust. The client file gets corrupted every time someone exports from the old platform. If you try to fix it manually, you'll be here until sunrise." That seems to be the intention, probably. He opened a blank spreadsheet on his own laptop. "Here, use the invoice IDs, not the client names. Names get duplicated. IDs don't lie as often." Sophia watched him work. There was no wasted movement in him, no dramatic confidence. He explained things the way a person did, when he had learned alone, and remembered how lonely confusion could feel. He showed her shortcuts, hidden folders, naming conventions that were never written down, the unofficial map beneath the official one. He told her which managers answered email only if copied with someone senior, which reports were checked carefully, and which existed only to prove that someone had suffered through making them. "Office survival," he said after a while, "is mostly learning where the floor is rotten." Sophia glanced at him. "And you learned by falling through?" He gave a small laugh, but it held no lightness. "A few times." The hum of the lights filled the space between them. Outside the windows, the city had darkened into glass and reflected neon. Most floors across the neighboring buildings glowed with the lonely geometry of late capitalism. Squares of light, abandoned desks, people trying not to disappear. Sophia took a sip of the coffee and discovered he had not exaggerated. "That is terrible," she said. "I warned you. It tastes like a printer fire." His mouth curved. "That's the premium blend." The warmth between them came quietly, without asking permission. For the next hour they worked side by side. Ethan did not do the tasks for her. That mattered. He guided, corrected, explained, then let her try. Sophia, who had negotiated with ministers and venture capital sharks, found herself concentrating fiercely on a vendor dashboard that loaded with the speed of an exhausted animal. When she made a mistake, Ethan pointed it out without making her feel small. It was an unfamiliar kind of kindness. Not grand, not flattering, useful. "You don't have to accept every impossible assignment," he said at one point, his voice lower now that the office was nearly empty. "They count on people being too embarrassed to ask what's reasonable." Sophia kept her eyes on the screen. "And if asking changes nothing, then you document, calmly, dates, times, missing access, unclear instructions. Loud people win the first 5 minutes. Careful people win the record." She turned toward him. There was something in the sentence that settled deep inside her. Meeting a part of herself she had not expected to bring into this office. In boardrooms, she had known the power of documentation as a weapon. Here Ethan spoke of it as shelter, as proof that one had existed honestly inside a system determined to rewrite them. "You sound like someone who has survived a war," she said softly. Ethan looked at the rows of desks, the abandoned swivel chairs, the motivational poster near the pantry that said excellence begins with ownership. "No," he said. "Just this place." The answer hurt more because he did not seem to intend it to. Sophia wanted to ask him about the project Lena had mentioned. The one people whispered had saved a client account before Victor presented it as his own. She wanted to ask why Ethan stayed, Why he lowered his eyes when he knew more than the men who dismissed him. Why he helped a stranger who could give him nothing. But she had her own secrets folded around her like armor, and she understood the cruelty of demanding openness while offering none. So instead she said, "Why are you helping me?" Ethan's hands stilled on the keyboard. For a moment, he seemed to consider giving her a practical answer, because the team needs the work done, because Marissa is unfair, because I was here anyway. Then he looked at her. "Because you didn't defend yourself today," he said. "Not because you couldn't, because you chose not to." Sophia felt the words strike quietly beneath her ribs. He had seen it. Not the truth, not the name Laurent hidden behind her employee badge, not the empire she had built from code and risk and sleepless youth. But he had seen the shape of restraint. He had seen that her silence was not emptiness. It frightened her more than Marissa's cruelty. Power could protect her from enemies. It had never protected her from being understood. "I'm not sure that was wise," she admitted. "Maybe not," Ethan said. "But it was deliberate." Sophia looked down at her hands. The signature from earlier seemed to linger in her fingers like a bruise. "I'm trying to learn what is true here. And what have you learned?" She glanced across the dim office. At the conference room, at Marissa's empty desk, at Mr. Bennett's darkened office door, at Victor's corner workspace where the monitor still glowed though he had gone. "That the official version of reality is very well formatted," she said, "and often false." Ethan's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Then trust the messy version a little more." She looked at him then, really looked, at the tiredness he carried without complaint, at the intelligence no title had bothered to honor, at the steadiness that did not announce itself but remained, which was rarer than charm and more dangerous to lose. For the first time since she had entered this company undercover, Sophia felt her internal compass shift. She had come here trusting data, reports, executive summaries, culture audits printed on thick paper with optimistic language. She had trusted systems because systems were measurable. But sitting beside Ethan under the fluorescent lights, watching him turn chaos into clarity with patient hands, she began to trust something far less official, his judgment, not blindly. Sophia had not built anything by being careless, but there was a difference between suspicion and discernment, and Ethan seemed to live inside that difference with painful grace. At 9:40, they finished the last presentation slide. The vendor summary was clean. The reconciled data was defensible. The corrupted files were flagged with notes, so precise Marissa would have trouble twisting them without revealing her own bad faith. Sophia leaned back, exhaustion loosening something in her shoulders. "I would still be on the first file without you." "No," Ethan said, closing his laptop. "You would have figured it out. When, eventually." "That is a very diplomatic answer. I work in corporate." She laughed softly, and the sound surprised them both. For a brief second, the office did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like two people remaining after the noise had left, sharing bad coffee and worse fluorescent lighting, building a small country out of competence and trust. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down casually at first. The casualness faded. Sophia noticed this because she had started to notice him too. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen slightly toward her. "It came from Lena," he said. "She says someone forwarded it to her by mistake, internal admin thread." Sophia read the message. At first only fragments stood out. New hire verification. Unusual gaps. No confirmed prior employer, understated background, request discreet review. Then one line, sharper than the rest, seemed to detach itself from the glow of the screen. "Find out who Sophia Laurent really is before this becomes a liability." The office around her went very still. The fluorescent lights hummed on, indifferent and bright, while somewhere inside the company, someone had already begun pulling at the first thread of her hidden life. By morning, The rumor had already learned how to walk. It moved faster than official emails, lighter than paper, slipping between cubicles with the soft sound of chairs rolling back and voices lowering at the exact moment Sophia passed by. It appeared first in the pantry, where two analysts stopped stirring their coffee when she entered, then near the printers, where someone had left a stack of reports unfinished and an expression of false surprise on her face. By 10 o'clock, it had reached the shared drive in the form of a joke file name, one that disappeared seconds after Sophia saw it. New Girl Special Access. Sophia stood before the copier with a page in her hand and felt, for the first time since entering the company Undercover, something dangerously close to anger. Not because they doubted her resume, that had been expected. She had deliberately built a modest background, one humble enough to be questioned by people who worshipped prestigious names. Not because they were investigating her either. That thread from the night before had already warned her the net was tightening. It was the nature of their assumption that pressed against something old in her chest. They did not believe she could have earned her seat. So they gave her another story, a favor, a man, a hidden connection. Something shameful enough to explain why a woman like her had been allowed through the door. She had spent her life watching powerful men make entire careers out of favors and call them strategy. Yet here, under these fluorescent lights, a quiet woman with a plain handbag and careful manners needed only to exist before the office began inventing dirt beneath her shoes. When Sophia returned to her desk, Marissa Vale was already waiting. Marissa did not stand near Sophia's cubicle by accident. She arranged herself there as if taking ownership of the air. One hand held a folder, the other rested on Sophia's desk, fingers tapping lightly against the cheap laminate surface. "Sophia," she said, with that bright, polished smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Hale wants the revised vendor comparison before lunch." Sophia glanced at the folder. "That wasn't assigned to me yesterday." "No, it wasn't." Marissa's smile widened. "But since you seem to have come in through a flexible channel, I'm sure flexibility is one of your strengths." A few heads lifted nearby. "Not fully, never fully." Cowardice in offices often wore the disguise of being busy. Sophia looked at her calmly. "I can finish it if I have the source data, you can find it. People who get special chances should work extra hard to deserve them." The words were not loud. They were worse than loud. They were measured for an audience. Sophia accepted the folder. Her fingertips remained steady, but inside her, something settled into a colder shape. She had known cruelty from boardrooms before. She had watched executives smile while destroying livelihoods, heard shareholders applaud numbers that meant families had lost their insurance. But this cruelty was smaller, more intimate. It did not announce itself as ambition. It disguised itself as office order, professional standards, culture fit, and perhaps that made it uglier. By noon, the vendor comparison had become 3 tasks. By 1, 5. Every data sheet Marissa directed her toward was incomplete. Every permission Sophia requested was delayed. Victor Hale walked past twice without looking at her, yet both times Marissa received messages immediately after, and both times another urgent correction appeared. Sophia worked without complaint. That was what unsettled them most. If she defended herself, they could call her arrogant. If she broke down, they could call her weak. So she remained composed, and the more composed she became, the more personal the attacks grew. At 2:30, someone left a paper cup on her desk with a sticky note attached. "For whoever sponsored you. You look thirsty." There was a tiny lipstick mark drawn on the rim in red pen. Sophia stared at it for a second too long. Her first instinct was not to cry. It was to destroy. Not dramatically, not impulsively. She thought of audit chains, termination clauses, misconduct documentation, internal surveillance requests. She thought of how easily she could make a phone call and turn the entire floor into a case study in executive consequences. But Ethan appeared before she moved. He did not touch the cup immediately. He looked at the note, then at the surrounding desks, and his face changed so subtly that only someone watching closely would have seen it. The quietness remained. The softness did not. He picked up the cup, crumpled the note into his palm, and dropped both into the trash bin beside his own desk. No speech, no performance, just refusal. The office pretended not to notice, which meant everyone noticed. Sophia looked at him. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. Ethan sat down, opened his spreadsheet, and replied without looking up, "Probably. That may make things harder for you." They already were. There was no bitterness in his voice. That was what hurt more. It sounded practiced, like a sentence he had used for years to fold disappointment into something small enough to carry. Before Sophia could answer, Marissa clapped her hands near the conference area. "Team, check in everyone. 5 minutes." It was never 5 minutes. Sophia followed the others into the glass-walled meeting room. The city outside looked pale beneath the afternoon haze. Tall buildings standing shoulder to shoulder, like people who never had to apologize for taking up space. Victor Hale stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled to suggest hard work he had not done. Marissa sat beside him with a laptop open and a pleasant expression. "We're reviewing ownership on the Sterling vendor analysis," Victor said. "There have been delays." Sophia felt the room turn toward her before anyone moved. Marissa sighed. "Not too heavily, just enough. I tried to support Sophia, but the quality has been inconsistent. We may need to consider whether she's ready for client-adjacent work." A junior employee at the far end stared down at his notebook. Lena Ortiz, sitting 2 seats away from Sophia, tightened her jaw. Victor clicked to the next slide. Sophia saw the file on the screen and understood immediately her draft, but altered. Sections had been rearranged so inclusions contradicted the data. One chart displayed old pricing. Another table omitted 2 key vendors entirely. Anyone looking at it cold would think the author had either been careless or incompetent. The room blurred at the edges for half a heartbeat, not from fear, from clarity. So this was the next step, not just extra work. Evidence. Marissa turned to her with a pitying smile. "Sophia, do you want to explain your methodology?" Sophia rested her hands lightly in her lap. She could dismantle them. She knew the timestamps, the access logs, the metadata trails. She knew how systems remembered what people tried to erase. Her whole empire had been built on teaching machines to preserve truth when humans edited it for convenience. But she could not use the full extent of that knowledge without revealing more than a junior employee should know. Before she decided how much to expose, Ethan spoke. "This isn't her version." The room shifted. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Ethan sat straight, both hands on the table. He was not loud, but the words landed with weight. "The draft Sophia sent me at 12:42 had current pricing and all 5 vendors. The version on screen has been modified." Marissa laughed lightly. "And why was Sophia sending you her unfinished work?" "Because I helped her locate the source files you told her to find without access." The laughter died. Sophia turned toward him, and something in her chest tightened. He had stepped out from the safe place he had carefully built for himself. In an office like this, survival belonged to those who never contradicted power in public. Ethan knew that better than anyone, yet he had just placed his name beside hers, in front of Victor Hale. Victor's expression hardened. "Ethan, this meeting is not about you." "No," Ethan said. "It's about whether we're going to pretend." This file wasn't tampered with. The silence that followed was so complete Sophia could hear the air conditioning hum above them. Marissa's face changed by 1 shade. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation." Victor closed the laptop slowly. "We will discuss your tone later." Ethan did not look away, of course. The meeting ended 3 minutes afterward with no conclusion. which in that office meant the damage had simply been postponed. People rose quickly, chairs scraped. No one met Sophia's eyes except Lena, who gave her a brief, fierce look that said she had seen everything. Outside the conference room, Marissa passed close enough for Sophia to hear her murmur. "You collect defenders quickly." Sophia turned her head. "No, I recognize decent people slowly." For once, Marissa did not answer. Ethan returned to his desk, but the cost arrived before the hour ended. A message from Victor summoned him to a closed office. Through the glass, Sophia saw only pieces. Victor standing, Ethan listening. Marissa seated in the corner, legs crossed, a folder opened on the desk like an accusation waiting for a signature. 15 minutes later, Ethan came out. His face was calm, too calm. Sophia waited until he reached his desk. "What happened?" "Nothing immediate." "That isn't an answer." He gave a faint smile, tired around the edges. "It's the only kind they give here." Lena passed behind them and placed a file on Sophia's desk, though it clearly did not belong there. Without stopping, she said under her breath, "He was removed from the Orion Review." Ethan looked at her, Lena. She ignored the warning in his voice and kept walking. Sophia knew enough now to understand the meaning. The Orion Review was the only high-visibility project Ethan had been near in months. Not assigned to lead. Of course, people like Ethan were allowed to save things quietly, never to stand beside them when praise arrived. But even proximity mattered. Removing him was not discipline on paper. It was punishment designed to leave no bruise. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "You lost that because of me. I lost that because Victor doesn't like being corrected. But you corrected him for me." Ethan's fingers rested on the edge of his keyboard. He did not type. Finally, he said, "You were being set up." The simplicity of it almost undid her. In Sophia's world, people protected others for reasons, political reasons, financial reasons, familial reasons. Even affection, in her world, often arrived wrapped in calculation. But Ethan had protected her when she appeared to have nothing to offer him except more trouble. No access, no influence, no profitable gratitude, just a desk near his, a quiet voice, a dignity others found easy to test. She wanted to tell him then, but enough. Enough to remove the unfairness of him standing in front of blows meant for a disguise. Enough to say, "You are not defending someone helpless. You are defending someone who could burn this building's rot down to its foundations." But the words stayed behind her teeth. Because if she told him now, would the look in his eyes change? Would he step back? Would every shared coffee, every quiet explanation, every small act of care become contaminated by the scale of what she had hidden? The thought frightened her more than Marissa's cruelty. That evening, most people left early, eager to escape the tension they had helped create. Rain began after 6, streaking the windows until the city lights blurred into soft, trembling lines. Sophia stayed behind, reviewing access logs through the limited channels available to her false role, taking careful notes in a private file no one else could see. Ethan was still there too. Of course he was. At 7, he placed a small packet of crackers on her desk. "You didn't eat lunch," he said. Sophia looked at the crackers, then at him. The fluorescent lights made everyone look a little tired, a little less protected. On Ethan, exhaustion did not appear as weakness. It appeared as restraint, as if he had spent years learning how to make hunger, anger, and disappointment sit quietly in the same chair. "Do you always notice things like that?" she asked. "Only when people try to hide them badly." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It surprised them both. For a moment, the day loosened its grip. She opened the crackers. "Thank you." He leaned against the edge of the neighboring desk, keeping a careful distance. "You handled today well. I wanted to do worse, I know." She looked up. Ethan's mouth softened. "You have a very polite murder face." This time her laugh was real, quiet but unmistakable. It warmed the empty office more than the overhead lights ever could. Then the warmth settled into something gentler, more dangerous. Sophia lowered her gaze to the packet in her hands. "Why did you step in?" He was silent long enough that she wondered if he would deflect. But when he spoke, his voice had changed. "Because I know what it's like," he said. "To watch someone else arrange the story before you get to speak." There it was again. The door behind the door. The part of him no one in the office mentioned directly, but everyone seemed to know enough to use against him. Sophia's voice softened. "Did that happen to you?" Ethan looked toward Victor's darkened office. "A long time ago. How long?" He smiled, faintly, but there was no humor in it. Long enough that people stopped asking and started assuming. Sophia wanted to reach for him. The desire was so sudden, so human, that she curled her fingers around the crackers instead. He was standing less than 2 steps away, yet something in him seemed kept behind glass, preserved not by coldness but by habit. "Ethan," she said, and his name sounded different in the quiet, less like a colleague's name, and more like a promise she had no right to make. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." His eyes returned to hers. For a brief second, she saw the loneliness there, not dramatic, not asking for pity, just a deep, familiar solitude, the kind built by years of being useful but unseen, needed but never chosen, trusted with work but not with truth. And because she recognized it, something inside her answered. "No one ever says that here," he said. "What?" "That I don't have to give them something." Sophia felt the words move through her like rain finding a crack in stone. Neither of them moved. The office around them was all shadow and electric hum, desks abandoned, screens asleep. In that strange, colorless light, the space between them became fragile, not empty. Waiting. Then the elevator chimed. They stepped apart at the same time, though they had not been touching. Mr. Bennett, one of the department heads, emerged from the corridor with his coat over one arm and a phone pressed to his ear. He stopped when he saw them, his expression unreadable. His gaze flicked from Sophia to Ethan, then lingered on Ethan with the faint discomfort of a man remembering a file he preferred others not to open. He ended the call. "Still here?" Bennett asked. "Finishing the vendor revisions," Sophia replied. Bennett nodded, but his attention remained on Ethan. "Careful involving yourself in disputes, Ethan. You know better than most how quickly a personnel matter can follow a person." Ethan's face went still. Sophia noticed. Bennett noticed that she noticed. The older man gave a small, tired sigh, as if he had already said more than intended. "There are reasons promotion committees hesitate," he added quietly. "Some incidents stay in a file longer than people expect." Then he walked away, leaving the sentence behind him like a locked drawer placed in the center of the room. Sophia turned to Ethan. But Ethan was no longer looking at her. He was staring at the dark glass of Victor Hale's office, and for the first time since she had known him, his composure looked less like peace and more like a wound that had learned how to stand upright. Ethan did not explain. For a few seconds after Mr. Bennett left, the office was so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to press down on them like a hand. Sophia stood beside the conference table, the half-finished vendor revisions open on her screen, but the numbers had lost their shape. All she could see was Ethan's profile reflected in the black glass of Victor Hale's office. Still, pale, unreadable. There were people who became silent because they had nothing to say. Ethan's silence was different. It was the kind that had been built brick by brick, each layer placed there by someone else's convenience, someone else's threat, someone else's need to survive untouched. Sophia wanted to ask him what Bennett had meant. She wanted to say that whatever incident was hidden in his file, she did not believe it belonged to him. But she had lived too long among boardrooms and contracts not to recognize the delicate edge of a private wound. If she touched it clumsily, even kindness, it would still bleed. So she only said softly, "You don't have to stay. I can finish this." Ethan blinked as if returning from somewhere far away. "It's fine," he replied. "The vendor terms have 3 inconsistencies. If you submit them as they are, Marissa will say you didn't check the legacy pricing." There it was again. That practical steadiness, that habit of protecting someone while pretending he was merely correcting a document. Sophia looked at him. "And if you stay to help me, Bennett may put another note in your file." A faint smile crossed Ethan's face, so brief it almost did not exist. "My file is already crowded." He turned back to his laptop before she could answer. That night, long after the office lights began switching off row by row, Sophia remained seated in the empty pantry with a cup of coffee she had not tasted. Ethan had left at 9:23, carrying his worn messenger bag on one shoulder, pausing by the elevator only long enough to remind her to lock the archive cabinet, because Victor's assistant sometimes came in early. He had said it like a small office tip. Sophia heard it as a warning. At 10, the cleaning staff rolled their carts through the corridor. At 10:15, the security guard at reception changed shifts. At 10:30, Sophia Laurent stopped being the timid new administrative analyst named Sophie Lane and became, silently, the woman whose signature could move divisions, remove executives, and freeze accounts across continents. She opened her private secure line. "Claire," she said when her aunt answered. There was a pause, then the dry rustle of papers. "If you are calling me this late, either you have discovered rot, or you have fallen in love with the wrong man." Sophia closed her eyes for half a second. Possibly both. Aunt Claire did not laugh. "That company has always smelled too clean," she said. "Tell me." Sophia kept her voice low. She told Claire about Marissa's public humiliations, Victor's quiet manipulations, Bennett's nervous warning, and the mention of Ethan's file. She did not say how Ethan looked when his past brushed against him. She did not say that his pain had unsettled her more than the corruption itself. Claire listened without interruption. Finally, she said, "If a man like Bennett warns him in front of you, it means the file is not just personnel history, it is leverage. I want access. You already have access. Not as Sophia Laurent, not yet. Then use the channels you built for this exact reason." Sophia's fingers tightened around the phone. Years ago, after acquiring the parent corporation, she had created an internal ethics archive independent from local HR systems. Most executives considered it an ornamental compliance gesture. They did not know it mirrored audit trails, complaint patterns, project ownership histories, deleted promotion notes, and altered performance records. A quiet net beneath the shining floor. Until now, Sophia had resisted using it too aggressively. She had wanted to observe the company like an ordinary employee, to feel the weather from below, not command lightning from above. But Ethan's faces in the dark glass had changed something. "Be careful," Claire said, softer now. "Pity can cloud judgment." "This isn't pity, no." "No," Sophia said. "It's recognition." The word surprised even her. After the call ended, she waited until the pantry door closed behind the last cleaner. Then she took out a slim silver tablet from the inner pocket of her bag, logged into the encrypted founder portal, and entered the subsidiary code. The first files appeared clean. Too clean. Employee summaries, promotion histories, performance ratings, attrition charts. On the surface, the numbers described an efficient office with strict standards and consistent leadership. Underperformers left within 18 months. High performers were promoted through approved channels. Team stability remained within acceptable variance. Sophia had reviewed thousands of corporate dashboards in her life. The beautiful ones always frightened her most. She searched Ethan Cole. His profile opened with modest markers: reliable, technically proficient, collaborative, cautious in leadership settings. His salary history showed minimal growth. His promotion recommendations had stalled 3 times at senior review. Then Sophia found the incident. 3 years ago, The subsidiary had faced a workflow crisis during the launch integration of a major logistics platform. A back-end sequencing failure had delayed vendor approvals across 4 regions. Penalty clauses were within 48 hours of triggering. The projected loss had been large enough to appear in a parent company risk brief. Sophia remembered that incident. At the time, Victor Hale had been praised for decisive intervention. A senior executive, Dorian Shaw, then regional operations director, and now one of the top managers in the group, had presented the recovery plan to the board. His name had appeared in congratulatory memos. Victor's team received executive bonuses. The crisis vanished from memory, like all disasters solved before shareholders could smell smoke. But the archived system logs told a different story. Sophia leaned closer. The first corrective model had not been uploaded by Dorian Shaw, not by Victor, not by Marissa's department. It had been drafted on Ethan Cole's terminal at 2:14 a.m. There were time-stamped revisions, dependency maps, process redirections, vendor batch prioritization formulas. A note attached to the file read, "Temporary needs approval before sunrise." At 3:02 a.m., Ethan sent it to Victor. At 3:17 a.m., Victor forwarded it to Dorian Shaw at 4:40 a.m. A nearly identical version was uploaded under Dorian's recovery framework. At 8:30 a.m., Ethan received a written reprimand for bypassing workflow hierarchy. Sophia sat motionless. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, and in that brief broken flash, the office around her seemed less like a workplace than a stage set. Desks arranged neatly over buried bones. She opened the reprimand. Language sharp enough to frighten a junior employee, vague enough to be defensible. Failure to observe chain of command, disruptive unilateral action, inappropriate escalation during crisis response. His rating that year dropped from exceeds expectations to needs managerial guidance. 6 months later, promotion committee notes described him as technically useful but politically unstable. Politically unstable, for saving millions. Sophia felt something cold move through her chest. She searched connected records. There were no formal complaints from Ethan, no appeal, no dispute, no request for review. Only one personal leave application filed, 2 reasons: family medical support, emergency contact, Nora Cole, relationship, younger sister. Sophia opened the benefits record, then stopped herself. There were lines even power should not cross casually, but the file summary was enough. Nora Cole had required long-term treatment then. Ethan had been the primary insurance holder. If he lost his job, she would lose coverage. Sophia understood then, with a pain so quiet it nearly took her breath away. Ethan had not stayed silent because he lacked courage. He had stayed silent because someone he loved could not afford his pride. For a long moment, Sophia saw him differently. Not as the calm man who explained spreadsheets and shielded her from Marissa's cruelty, but as a young employee sitting under these same lights at 2 in the morning, saving a company that would punish him for being useful in the wrong direction. She imagined his finger hovering over the complaint form, imagined him closing it because a hospital bill mattered more than justice. Her own secret suddenly felt heavier. She had chosen concealment as a strategy. Ethan had been forced into invisibility as survival. The difference shamed her the next morning. Marissa arrived with perfume sharp enough to announce authority before her heels reached the department floor. "Sophie," she called, dropping a stack of folders onto Sophia's desk. "Since you enjoy staying late, you can reconcile the quarterly vendor exceptions." Noon. The stack was impossible. Everyone nearby knew it. A few people lowered their eyes. One man pretended to cough. Lena Ortiz looked over from the printer, lips pressed tightly together. Sophia touched the top folder calmly. "Of course." Marissa smiled. "That means accurately, not just neatly. There's a difference." Ethan, at his desk 2 rows away, looked up. Not openly enough to create a scene, just enough. Sophia did not look back. If she did, she feared he would see too much in her face. By 11, she had discovered that the vendor exceptions were not random either. Several accounts flagged as delayed had been routed away from capable analysts and assigned to newer or isolated employees, then used as evidence in performance downgrades. Lena had been marked twice, Ethan repeatedly. Anyone who questioned procedures became resistant. Anyone too quiet became lacking leadership presence. Anyone useful without patronage became overworked until their record cracked. At lunch, Lena slipped into the small copy room while Sophia was scanning invoices. "You didn't hear this from me," Lena murmured, pretending to refill toner. "But be careful with those folders. Marissa gives them to people she wants gone." Sophia kept her eyes on the scanner. Gone, transferred, pushed out, buried in bad reviews. Lena's voice lowered. "It's not just her she takes direction, Victor too. People think this place is petty, but petty doesn't run this smoothly." Sophia slowly turned a page. "Who does?" Lena hesitated. Fear moved across her face like a passing shadow. "Above them," she whispered. "Someone who decides who gets to rise before the work is even done." Then she left. That sentence stayed with Sophia for the rest of the day. Someone who decides who gets to rise. By evening, the office emptied again. Ethan paused by her desk, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "You skipped lunch," he said. "So did you. I had crackers. That doesn't count. It counts if you lower your standards." He placed 1 cup beside her keyboard. For a moment, the day's ugliness softened. His sleeve was rolled to his forearm, his tie loosened, fatigue shadowing his eyes. He looked ordinary, in the way honest things often looked ordinary until the world needed saving. Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Ethan," she said carefully, "have you ever thought about leaving?" He did not answer right away. "Everyone thinks about leaving." "That's not what I asked." His gaze moved to the folders on her desk. "Some people don't get to make decisions based only on themselves." Sophia felt the truth of his file between them, invisible but alive. "Your sister," she said before she could stop herself. Ethan's expression changed, not anger first, alarm. "How do you know about Nora?" The room seemed to shrink around them. Sophia's heartbeat struck once, hard. She had been too affected, too careless. The distance between Sophie Lane and Sophia Laurent narrowed dangerously under the fluorescent lights. "I heard you mention her once." She lied softly. He studied her. Ethan was too observant not to notice the seam in her answer, but too kind to pull at it in public. "She's better now," he said after a moment. "Back then she wasn't. I'm glad." He looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. "Whatever Marissa gave you, don't try to prove yourself by carrying it alone." "Is that what you did?" The question landed too close. Ethan's jaw tightened. "What I had to." Sophia wanted to say, "I know." She wanted to say, "They stole from you, and I will not let them keep what they took." Instead, she held his gaze with everything she could not yet confess. "You deserved better," she said. For a brief instant, his composure faltered. Something raw and disbelieving opened in his eyes, as if praise without motive was more dangerous to him than insult. Then he looked away. "Be careful saying things like that here," he murmured. "This place punishes people for believing they deserve anything." After he left, Sophia did not move for a long time. That was when she finally understood the office cruelty was not random. Marissa's mockery, Victor's warnings, Bennett's evasions, the stalled promotions, the stolen work, the impossible assignments, none of it was merely personal weakness or bad management. It was a culture designed with purpose. Keep the independent thinkers exhausted. Keep the honest ones afraid. Reward those who obeyed the hidden ladder. Make dignity expensive enough that most people could no longer afford it. And somewhere above the daily humiliation, someone was benefiting from all of it. Sophia returned to the founder portal with a steadiness that no longer felt observational. She cross-referenced performance downgrades against project contribution logs, promotion committee edits, and executive bonus approvals. A pattern emerged. Names disappeared after strong results. Ratings shifted after successful independent interventions. Credit moved upward. Blame moved downward. Then she found the folder that should not have existed. It was buried in a restricted managerial archive under a mislabeled compliance tag. Inside were editable performance calibration sheets for multiple employees, including Ethan and Lena. Several entries had been altered after submission. Original supervisor remarks praising initiative had been replaced with phrases like "not aligned," "difficult to manage," and "limited executive presence." The changes were not made by Marissa, not by Victor. The authorization signature belonged to Dorian Shaw. Sophia opened the latest file, and the blood in her veins seemed to turn silent. Ethan's current review had already been edited for the upcoming promotion cycle. His project contributions were reduced, his risk assessment inflated, and a note had been added recommending he be excluded from advancement due to recurring pattern of destabilizing team hierarchy. Attached beneath it was a private ranking list of employees marked as internal competition risks. Lena's name was there, Ethan's name was there, and at the bottom, newly added that morning, was Sophie Lane. Sophia stared at the screen, the fluorescent lights trembling over the glass, as the final piece clicked into place. One of the top managers was falsifying performance records to erase anyone who might rise without permission. Sophia did not close the file right away. For a long moment, she simply sat there with her hands resting on the keyboard, the blue-white glow of the monitor making her face look paler than usual. Around her, the office had thinned into its after-hours version. Half-lit aisles, abandoned mugs, the low hum of air conditioning, and fluorescent lights that seemed too bright for secrets. Dorian Shaw, the name did not belong in the shadows of daily office cruelty. Marissa's pettiness had always been loud. Victor's manipulation had carried the greasy fingerprints of ambition. But Dorian was different. He was senior enough to speak in strategy meetings, polished enough to be trusted by board members, and distant enough that employees like Sophie Lane were never supposed to know he existed. That was the sickness of it. The hands that erased people were never the hands that had to look them in the eye. Sophia took out her phone, photographed the metadata, exported copies to a secure drive hidden behind layers of encryption, then created a second trail that would appear ordinary if anyone checked her workstation. Her movements were calm, practiced, almost cold. But beneath that calm, anger was growing in her like a quiet flame. She had built Laurent global believing systems could protect people from the whims of power, compliance committees, review panels, anonymous reporting lines, leadership training. All those elegant structures she had approved from glass rooms above the city. And yet here, under her own fluorescent lights, someone had learned how to turn those systems into weapons. A soft noise came from behind her. Sophia minimized the window before she turned. Ethan stood near the end of the aisle, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding 2 paper cups. He paused when he saw her expression. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He lifted 1 cup slightly. The vending machine coffee was terrible, so I walked 2 blocks for something slightly less terrible. He placed 1 cup on her desk without ceremony, as though this was not an act of care, but a small correction to the universe. Sophia looked down. The cup was warm. On the lid, someone from the cafe had drawn a crooked smile in black marker. Her chest tightened for reasons that had nothing to do with strategy. "You didn't have to, I know," that was all he said. Ethan did not ask what she was working on. He did not lean over her screen. He did not perform concern in that heavy way some men did, as if worry gave them rights over a woman's silence. He simply dragged a chair from the next desk and sat an angle, far enough not to intrude, close enough not to leave her alone. Sophia wrapped her fingers around the cup. In her life, people had given her diamonds, private jets, invitations, loyalty polished until it looked like affection. They had studied her preferences, memorized her schedule, bowed to the Laurent name before they had ever known the woman carrying it. But Ethan had noticed she skipped dinner. That small fact struck her with more force than any grand gesture should have. "You always stay this late?" she asked. "Not always. That means yes." A faint smile touched his mouth. "It means I'm bad at lying politely." Sophia almost smiled back. "Why?" He leaned back, eyes moving briefly toward the darkened office of the supervisors. "Because after everyone leaves, the office becomes honest." She waited. No one is pretending to be busier than they are. No one is performing authority. No one is laughing at someone else just to prove they're safe. His voice was even, but there was a tiredness in it she had come to recognize. "At night, it's just the work." Sophia looked at him across the cheap laminate desks, the shared cables, the stacks of files that had buried better people than those who signed their reviews. "You love the work," she said. Ethan lowered his eyes to his cup. "I used to. What changed?" He gave a small laugh without humor. "I learned that loving the work doesn't mean the work will love you back." The sentence settled between them, quiet and unbearably familiar. Sophia thought of boardrooms where men twice her age had smiled at her, like she was a fortunate heiress playing at leadership, until the quarterly numbers forced them to applaud. She thought of journalists who called her brilliant only after calling her beautiful, charitable only after calculating her net worth, powerful only in relation to the empire her family name evoked. Respect had always come to her wearing a price tag. "I know something about that," she said softly. Ethan looked up. "Do you?" The question was not mocking. It was open, and that made it more dangerous. Sophia could have answered as Sophie Lane. She could have spoken of student loans she did not have, rent worries she had never faced, a life carefully fabricated to survive the office. But the lie suddenly felt heavy on her tongue. So she chose a truth that did not reveal the secret. "I know what it feels like when people don't see you," she said. "Not really. They see what they can use, what they can take, what they can gain by standing near you or above you. After a while, you start wondering if being known is even possible." Ethan's gaze stayed on her, steady in a way that made her feel both exposed and sheltered. "That's a lonely way to live," he said. Sophia looked at the coffee cup in her hands. "So is being invisible?" He did not answer immediately. Outside the windows, the city glittered with wealth and hunger. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed on, indifferent. Sophia wondered how many people in this building had sat beneath them and swallowed humiliation because rent was due, because parents needed medicine, because children needed school shoes, because dignity did not pay invoices. Ethan turned his cup slowly between both hands. "When I first joined, I thought if I worked hard enough, someone would notice, not loudly. I never needed applause, just fairness." "You saved the Atlas project," Sophia said before she could stop herself. His hand stilled, the air changed. She realized too late that Sophie Lane should not have known the old internal name of that project. She had seen it buried in stolen performance records and executive summaries, attached to Victor Hale's rise like a medal he had not earned. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicion yet, something closer to surprise. "Lena told me," Sophia added quietly. "It was not entirely impossible." Lena knew many things, still Sophia felt the lie scrape. Ethan accepted it, or chose to. "I didn't save it alone, but your contribution was taken." His jaw tightened, the smallest betrayal of pain. "That's how this place works. You give them something useful, and they call it collaboration. You object, and they call you difficult." Sophia's fingers clenched around the cup. The proof in her drive suddenly felt less like evidence and more like a debt. "Why didn't you fight?" she asked. This time he did smile, but it was sad. "Because people like me don't get to fight. without calculating the cost. The answer pierced her more deeply than accusation would have. People like him, people without family wealth waiting beneath them like a safety net. People without legal teams one phone call away. People whose entire future could be broken by a few sentences in a performance review, written by someone with cleaner shoes and a colder heart. Sophia had come here to observe cruelty. She had not expected to be ashamed by how much cruelty depended on silence from people like her. "I'm sorry," she said. Ethan looked startled. For what? For the cost being so high. He studied her for a moment. "You say things strangely sometimes. Strangely. Like you're apologizing on behalf of the whole building." Sophia's breath caught. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed softly. The sound loosened something in him too, for a brief second. The office no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like two tired people sharing coffee after surviving the day. That was when footsteps sounded near the copy room. Both of them turned. A shadow moved past the frosted glass partition, then another. Voices drifted from the corridor, low but sharp. "Marissa, telling you." "She's not breaking," Marissa said. "That's the problem. Girls like that usually cry by week 2. Victor's voice followed, smooth and irritated. "Then stop being theatrical and make the record clean. Dorian doesn't want loose ends before the review cycle closes." Sophia's pulse slowed. Ethan went very still. Marissa scoffed. "Sophie Lane is a temp-level nobody. Why does Dorian even care?" "He cares because someone accessed restricted historical evaluations," Victor said. "And because your little public games are leaving witnesses." The silence that followed was thin and sharp. Sophia did not move. Ethan's chair made no sound. Between them, the monitor slept black, hiding secrets that could ruin powerful men if they reached the right hands. Marissa spoke again, quieter now. "What about Ethan?" Victor's reply came after a pause. "He's already marked. If he attaches himself to her, even better. We frame it as collusion, disruption, unauthorized data handling. People believe patterns when HR gives them a name." Sophia felt Ethan absorb the words beside her, not with shock, that was the worst part, with recognition. As if he had always known the room was rigged, and only the timing of the trap was new. The footsteps faded. A door opened somewhere. Closed. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then Ethan rose and walked to the aisle, checking the corridor before returning. His face had changed, the gentleness remained, but beneath it was something harder. "You need to be careful," he said. Sophia looked at him. "So do you." "I'm serious." "So am I," he exhaled, frustrated. "Sophie, they can destroy your file. They can make sure no one hires you in any company connected to this industry. You don't know how far this goes." Sophia almost told him then. The truth rose in her throat with terrifying ease. "I own the company. They have only been teaching me how they destroy everyone else." But she saw his fear, and, beneath it, his instinct to protect her even while standing in the path of the same blade. If she revealed herself in that moment, would his concern become embarrassment? Would his kindness feel foolish to him? Would he look back at every coffee, every warning, every quiet defense, and see not intimacy, but a billionaire, letting him bleed beside her while she held the key? Her silence had protected the investigation. It had also begun to wound the one person who had never asked her for anything. "I know enough," she said. Ethan shook his head. "No, you don't." Sophia stood then, slowly. They were close now, close enough for her to see the fatigue at the corners of his eyes, the stubborn dignity he wore like armor, because no one had ever given him any other kind. "I know that you deserved better," she said. "Long before I came here, I know your work was stolen, your name was buried, and your silence was mistaken for weakness. I know they think people can be erased as long as the paperwork looks official." His expression shifted, unsettled by the intensity of her voice. "And I know," she continued, quieter now, "that when the truth comes out, I don't want it to save only me." Ethan stared at her. "What does that mean?" Sophia looked away first. It meant she had already crossed a line in her heart. At the beginning, she had planned to expose abuse, remove corrupt managers, repair broken systems. Clean, decisive, necessary. But Ethan had changed the shape of justice for her. It was no longer enough to punish those who had harmed him. She wanted the world to know what he had built. She wanted his name restored to every project it had been stripped from. She wanted rooms that had ignored him to stand when he entered. And more frightening than all of that, she wanted him to believe he had been seen before he was rewarded. "It means," she said carefully, "that I'm not as easy to crush as they think." A small, reluctant smile appeared on his face. I noticed the warmth in those two words almost undid her. Before she could answer, her computer chimed. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. Both sounds cut through the office with the clean cruelty of timing. Sophia turned to her screen. A new calendar invitation had appeared, flagged urgent, mandatory attender, Dorian Shaw's office. Subject: Formal Conduct and Performance Review. Attendees: Sophie Lane, Ethan Cole, Marissa Vale, Victor Hale, OCHA representative Dorian Shaw. Her eyes moved to the scheduled time. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Ethan looked down at his phone, and the color drained subtly from his face. Sophia did not need to ask if he had received the same message. Across the dark office, under the merciless fluorescent lights, the trap had finally been given a room, a time, and an official name. Dorian Shaw, the man behind the falsified records, had scheduled a formal review that could end both Sophia's position and Ethan's career. The room they used for formal reviews was always too bright. The fluorescent panels flattened everyone into the same pale version of themselves, as if the building preferred people when they looked exhausted and a little guilty. Sophia sat near the end of the conference table, with her hands folded lightly in her lap, her spine straight, her expression calm enough to annoy anyone looking for fear. Across from her, Marissa Vale wore satisfaction like polished jewelry. Victor Hale leaned back in his chair with the lazy confidence of a man who believed paperwork could be turned into a weapon. Dorian Shaw sat at the head of the table, expression carved into practiced concern, and beside him her had sent a woman whose face suggested she had already decided this meeting would be unpleasant for someone else. Ethan was seated one chair away from Sophia, quieter than everyone else, which somehow made the room feel even more dangerous. He had not spoken since entering. He only placed a slim folder on the table in front of him and kept his hands still. Dorian opened the meeting with the smooth voice of a man who had spent years making accusations sound like procedure. "This is a formal review," he said. "We are here to address performance concerns, communication issues, and several irregularities in the department's documentation." Marissa's smile sharpened, "and maybe clarify why certain people think they can ignore instructions." Victor gave a faint, amused breath. "Or why mistakes keep following the same names." Sophia did not look at either of them. She looked at Dorian. "Then please be specific." That quiet request made Marissa's eyes narrow. She had expected nerves, tears, some visible crack in the girl she had spent weeks pushing toward the edge. Instead, she got that same composed voice, that same unsettling stillness. It felt less like resistance than patience, and patience was harder to bully than fear. Dorian slid a printed report across the table. "Your recent submissions were late, incomplete, and in at least one case, mislabeled. There are also discrepancies in the inventory log and the client transfer sheet." Sophia lowered her gaze to the pages without touching them. The dates were familiar. The formatting was familiar. Even the phrasing was familiar in that bitter, specific way that told her someone had taken legitimate work and rewritten it after the fact, she said. "These versions are not the originals." Victor's mouth curved. "That's a convenient response." "No," Sophia said, still calm. "It's an accurate one." Marissa let out a small laugh, as if hearing a child insist the moon had been stolen. You really do like to sound confident. It's almost admirable. The H representative cleared her throat. Miss Lane, do you have evidence that these are altered? Sophia finally looked up. Yes. The room went slightly still. That was the first crack in their confidence. Not because they believed her yet, but because she had said yes without hesitation, without scrambling, without trying to buy time. Ethan beside her shifted a fraction in his chair, not much, just enough for her to feel that he was listening more closely now. Dorian folded his hands, then presented it. Sophia opened her own folder. Inside were printed copies of email chains, time-stamped file histories, and a clean comparison of revision paths from the shared server. She had spent the previous night quietly reconstructing what had happened, not because she trusted the company to protect her, but because she had learned long ago that truth in a corrupt place often needed to be arranged with the same care as evidence in court. She turned one page toward the center of the table. Here, she said. The inventory log was last edited on Tuesday at 7:14 p.m. from Victor's terminal. The original entry showed a correct transfer quantity. The current entry does not match the archive backup. The discrepancy was introduced after the backup timestamp, not before. Victor's eyes flicked down, just once, but it was enough. Marissa leaned forward, instantly defensive. And how would you know that? Because the system keeps revision history, Sophia replied. And because someone forgot that the archive server mirrors changes twice before final lock. The H representative blinked, surprised. Dorian's gaze sharpened, no longer bored. Sophia turned another page. The client transfer sheet was modified from a shared workstation in the East Corridor. The file was originally saved under my username, but the font metadata changed when it was re-exported. That only happens if someone opens the document in an older software suite and resaves it without preserving format settings. Victor's smile was gone now. That's obscure. Yes, Sophia said, which is why I'm surprised, but it wasn't checked before accusing me. Marissa crossed her arms. You're trying very hard to bury your own mistakes in technical language. Before Sophia could answer, Ethan spoke. Quietly, plainly, she's right. Every head in the room turned toward him. He did not look intimidated. He only looked tired, and somehow that made his voice more dangerous. The East Corridor workstation was left unlocked twice that week. I reported it in the maintenance log. Victor frowned. That doesn't prove anything. Ethan reached for the folder Sophia had brought and opened it to a printed maintenance record. It proves someone had access. And there's more. The file naming convention in the revised report matches Victor's usual format, not the one the operations team uses. He prefixes exports with the project code in lowercase. Sophie's drafts, and mine, use uppercase. That difference has been there for months. A silence settled over the table, not empty but alive with recalculation. Sophia glanced at Ethan once. He did not look at her, but the tension in his jaw softened just enough to tell her he had made that choice for her, not for himself. He was exposing a system, not seeking a stage. Marissa's voice rose slightly. So now we're all supposed to believe the two of you are some kind of expert team. Ethan finally looked at her. No, we're asking you to believe the records. That landed harder than any accusation. Dorian's expression had changed. He was no longer managing the room. He was measuring damage. Sophia could almost see the calculations moving behind his eyes. The instinct to close a door before sunlight entered. But he had already let too much in. She placed one final page on the table. This is the access log for the shared archive, she said. Notice the gap. The deletion occurred during a 22-minute maintenance window that was never logged with it. That means the records were altered outside normal protocol. Someone with higher permissions knew exactly how to make the changes invisible. Victor's face tightened, the first real sign of strain. You are making a serious accusation. Sophia met his eyes with quiet steadiness. I am making a precise one. For the first time, Marissa had nothing immediate to say. The smugness she wore so naturally had begun to slip at the edges, revealing irritation. Then uncertainty, then something close to fear. She had thought the review would be a ritual humiliation, a public correction for the girl everyone had judged as weak and disposable. Instead, Sophia had turned the room into a ledger, and every lie they had stacked up now had a line item attached to it. The HR representative looked between the papers and Dorian. These documents should have been reviewed before the meeting. Dorian's jaw tightened. We are reviewing them now. Now, Sophia said, after the conclusion was already decided. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. The truth had a way of filling the room more efficiently than anger ever could. Ethan added, she has also been assigned repeated corrections on tasks that were already approved by the team lead. Those corrections were not communicated through the proper channel. Marissa scoffed, but weakly. That is called supervision. No, Ethan said. It's called setting someone up to fail. The words hung there. Sophia felt something inside her shift. Not triumph exactly, but relief sharpened by pain. It was one thing to know the truth privately. It was another to hear it spoken in front of the people who had benefited from her silence. She had expected to survive this room. She had not expected Ethan to stand beside her with that kind of calm, clear courage, as if fairness itself were worth the risk. Dorian tapped his pen once against the table. Enough. We will need to verify these claims. Sophia nodded. Please do. That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically. Not like a door slamming or a verdict falling. It was subtler than that. The review had been built as a trap, but the trap had failed to close neatly. The evidence now lay on the table in plain light, and everyone in the room understood that the story they had prepared would not survive scrutiny without being rebuilt. Victor stood first, too abruptly. This is being taken out of context. Sophia looked up at him. Then context should be easy to provide. Marissa's face had gone cold. You're enjoying this? Sophia considered that for a second. Then she said, no, I'm relieved. That answer startled Marissa more than any sharp retort could have. Because it was honest. Because it came from a woman who had been cornered long enough to know the difference between justice and revenge. And because there was no gloating in it, only the simple exhaustion of someone who had finally proven she was not imagining the cruelty around her. Dorian gathered the papers slowly, his expression now carefully neutral. This meeting is suspended pending review. Sophia rose with measured grace. Ethan stood as well, not stepping ahead of her, only aligning himself beside her, as they both faced the table full of people who had expected surrender. As they moved toward the door, Dorian said something that made them both stop. Miss Lane, he said, the title now oddly formal, your knowledge of internal systems is unusually specific. Sophia turned back just enough to meet his eyes. He did not look suspicious yet, not exactly. More like a man who had just noticed a shape in the dark and was unsure whether it belonged there. It is, he said slowly, as if you already understood how the company is structured from the inside. The question in his voice was subtle, but it changed the air. Ethan glanced at Sophia, sensing it too. She kept her expression smooth, but inside, a small warning bell had begun to ring. Too many details, too much precision, too much calm under pressure. She had used the tools of her own world to survive a place that underestimated her. And now that competence was beginning to look less like coincidence and more like a clue. Dorian stood, his gaze fixed on her with a new, measuring intensity. Top management will want to see this. He paused, then added, actually, they've already asked for a private meeting with you. Sophia did not move. The room, still bright and airless, seemed to contract around that sentence. Dorian's tone had shifted from dismissal to calculation, as if he were no longer dealing with a low-level employee who had caused trouble, but with a person whose presence had become difficult to explain. His eyes narrowed slightly, following the thread of evidence, the strange timing, the level of institutional detail she should not have possessed. Something in the company had recognized her, not her name, not yet, but the pattern, and that, more than the review itself, was the first real danger. The private meeting was not held in Dorian's glass-walled conference room. That was the first thing everyone noticed. For ordinary disciplinary matters, employees were summoned into the small rooms near human resources, places with beige walls and weak coffee, where apologies were extracted, and futures were quietly threatened. But that morning, an assistant from the executive floor came down in person, wearing a navy suit and an expression too careful to be casual. "Sophia Laurent," she said, stopping at Sophia's desk. The name hung in the air with no weight at first, because to them it was still an ordinary name. A name attached to a quiet junior analyst who used a worn canvas bag, brought her own lunch, and had spent weeks enduring humiliation beneath fluorescent lights. Marissa, sitting 2 desks away, lifted her eyes with a faint smile. "Finally," she murmured, loud enough for others to hear. "I suppose top management does have limits." Sophia closed the folder in front of her. Her hands were steady, but beneath that steadiness, something inside her had gone very still. Not cold, not afraid, only aware. The kind of awareness that came before stepping into a room where nothing would remain as it had been. Ethan rose halfway from his chair before he seemed to realize he had moved. Their eyes met across the aisle. He did not ask where she was going. He did not warn her to be careful. He only looked at her with that quiet concern she had come to know too well. The kind that expected nothing and offered everything. It made her chest ache more than Marissa's cruelty ever had, because this was the moment he would stop knowing her as the woman he had protected. This was the moment she would become someone else in his eyes. Sophia gave him the smallest nod. Then she followed the assistant. The office went silent behind her. The elevator to the executive floor required a black access card. The assistant tapped it against the panel, and the doors slid shut with a soft metallic whisper. As they ascended, Sophia looked at her faint reflection in the mirrored wall. Pale blouse, simple skirt, hair tied neatly at the nape, no jewelry except a thin watch. She had built an empire wearing silk and diamonds, but she had discovered the truth wearing polyester under buzzing lights. How strange, she thought, that the cheaper costume had cost her more. When the elevator opened, 3 men were waiting. Dorian was there, his face controlled but colorless. Mr. Bennett stood beside him, jaw tight, fingers clasped behind his back, like a man preparing to survive a storm he had personally ignored for years. And at the center was Victor Hale, smiling in that polished way that never reached his eyes. "Mrs. Laurent," Victor said smoothly. "Thank you for coming." Sophia watched him. Not Sophie. Not Sophia from data support. Ms. Laurent. So he knew, or at least he knew enough to be afraid. The boardroom doors opened. Inside, the long table was full. Directors, legal counsel, regional heads, compliance officers, a few senior executives who had not visited this subsidiary in years were deep present faces, solemn, their tablets aligned as if neatness could absolve negligence. At the far end of the room, a large screen displayed the logo of Laurent Global Technologies, her company, her inheritance and her creation. The corporation she had expanded from a family investment firm into one of the most influential technology groups in the world. The name that opened doors, bent markets, frightened competitors, and inspired speeches at conferences where people discussed ethics under chandeliers. And beneath that same name, in one overlooked subsidiary, employees had learned to survive by lowering their eyes. Sophia walked to the empty chair near the center. No one asked her to sit. No one quite knew whether they had the right. A woman from legal cleared her throat. "Miss of Laurent," raised hand gently. The room stopped. It was not dramatic. She did not raise her voice. She did not slam documents onto the table. Power, real power, rarely needed noise. "I would prefer that everyone from the department be present," she said. Mr. Bennet's expression changed. "Everyone, yes," Sophia said. "Those who participated, those who watched, those who benefited, those who were silenced." Dorian lowered his gaze. Victor's smile thinned. "With respect, this is an executive matter. Bringing junior staff into a confidential review may create unnecessary confusion." Sophia turned to him. "Confusion," she said softly, "has been very useful to you, Mr. Hale." The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with sudden fear. Within 20 minutes, the department was assembled in the larger presentation hall on the executive floor. People filed in hesitantly, whispering, glancing at the security staff positioned by the doors. Marissa entered with a stiff back and a defensive expression, but when she saw the board members seated in the front row, her confidence faltered. Ethan came in last with Lena Ortiz beside him. His eyes found Sophia immediately. She stood at the front of the hall, no longer behind a desk, no longer holding copied reports or coffee. No one had thanked her for fetching. Behind her, the corporate logo glowed on the screen like a second sun. For a heartbeat, he simply stared. Sophia saw the moment understanding began to move through him. Not fully, not yet, but enough to wound. Lena's lips parted. Marissa frowned, then looked from Sophia to the executives, to the logo, to the legal counsel standing near the wall. "What is this?" Marissa whispered. No one answered her. Mr. Bennet stepped forward, his voice rough with strain. "This meeting has been convened under the authority of Laurent Global Technologies, controlling shareholder and founder." Murmurs rose instantly. Sophia remained still. Mr. Bennet swallowed. Sophia Laurent. The room did not understand, then the name landed, not as a rumor, not as an office joke, not as a coincidence, as a verdict. The color drained from Marissa's face so quickly it seemed almost cruel to watch. A young analyst gasped. Someone near the back whispered, "No way," and then covered their mouth if the words themselves had become dangerous. Dorian's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Ethan did not move at all. That was what hurt her most. Not shock, not anger, just stillness. Sophia stepped toward the microphone, though she did not need it. "My name is Sophia Laurent," she said. "For the past several weeks, I have worked in your department as a junior employee. I came here because the performance reports from this subsidiary did not match the turnover data, the complaint withdrawal patterns, or the internal promotion records. On paper, this office was efficient. In reality, it was afraid. No one breathed loudly now. I was assigned impossible workloads without training. My work was taken and submitted under other names. I was mocked for my clothes, my supposed background, my lack of connections. I was excluded from meetings where my own analysis was presented. When I documented irregularities, I was treated as disruptive." Her gaze moved over the room. It did not linger on Marissa first. That would have been too easy. Instead, she looked at the people who had laughed softly and looked away, the people who had known better but chose safety. "This is not about my pride," Sophia continued. "I have survived worse things than office cruelty, but many employees here did not have the protection I had. They had rent to pay, parents to support, visas, debts, medical bills, children. They could not afford to be brave every day in a system designed to punish honesty." At the side of the room, Lena's eyes reddened. Marissa suddenly stood. "I didn't know who you were." The words left her like a defense she believed might save her. Sophia looked at her then. "No," she said. "You didn't." Marissa's mouth trembled. "And that is exactly why this matters." The room fell so quiet that the hum of the projector became unbearable. Sophia lifted a tablet from the podium. "Marissa Vale, you repeatedly reassigned work after hours to junior employees, while reporting their output as your own supervisory initiative. You altered task records to make delays appear to originate below you. You spread false comments about employees' financial backgrounds and competence. 3 people resigned from your team in 18 months citing personal reasons, after filing complaints that were later withdrawn under pressure. Marissa gripped the chair in front of her. That's not. People exaggerate. Everyone works hard here. Ethan Ward worked hard, Sophia said. Ethan's head lifted slightly. Sophia's voice changed, and that change was small enough that only someone listening with the heart would notice. 2 years ago, the Nova Stream recovery plan prevented the loss of a major client account. The solution was drafted by Ethan, revised under pressure overnight, and then submitted by Victor Hale under his own name. Ethan received no credit, no promotion, and no adjustment in compensation. A ripple passed through the room. Victor's face hardened. That accusation is absurd. Legal counsel pressed a key. The screen changed. Emails appeared. Timestamps, draft histories, file ownership data. Message from Ethan sent at 2:14 a.m. with a technical recommendation almost identical to the final strategy Victor later presented. Then another email from Victor. Good work. Send me the raw notes. I'll clean this up for leadership. Ethan stared at the screen as if seeing a buried part of his life dug out and placed in public light. Sophia could barely look at him. She had known his talent. She had known his silence. But evidence gave shape to pain. And now everyone could see how much he had swallowed. Victor leaned forward. Documents can be misinterpreted. Ms. Laurent, with all respect, your undercover presence may have created emotional bias. You formed personal relationships within the department. That complicates my personal relationships, Sophia interrupted. Did not create your misconduct. The sentence was calm, but it cut cleanly. She turned back to the room. Effective immediately, Marissa Vale is suspended pending termination review. Victor Hale is removed from all operational authority pending investigation by outside counsel. Dorian Shaw will cooperate with compliance regarding his knowledge of reporting irregularities. Mr. Bennett, your leadership record will be reviewed by the parent board. Mr. Bennett closed his eyes briefly. No one applauded. This was not triumph in the easy sense. It was too heavy for that. Vindication had weight. Justice did not arrive like music. It arrived like a door opening onto rooms people had pretended did not exist. So saw fear in some faces, relief in others. She saw shame, resentment, hope struggling to believe it would not be punished. Then she saw Ethan turn away. It was only a slight movement, but her heart followed it. After the meeting dissolved into stunned clusters and urgent whispers, Sophia stepped down from the front. People moved aside for her now. The same people who had brushed past her by the copier made room as if proximity required permission. Their respect felt colder than their contempt. Sophia. Lena approached first. Her voice was unsteady, but her eyes were kind. I don't know what to say. Sophia managed a faint smile. You don't have to say anything. You were alone through all that. No, Sophia said, her gaze drifting across the room to where Ethan stood near the exit. Not entirely. Lena understood and stepped back. Sophia crossed the hall slowly. Ethan did not leave, though everything in his posture suggested he wanted to. He stood with his hands at his sides, face pale, eyes unreadable. Ethan, she said softly. He looked at her then, and the distance in his eyes frightened her more than any boardroom confrontation. So he said, Sophia Laurent. She absorbed the name as he spoke it. Not warmly, not with wonder, like a fact placed between them. Yes, he gave a small nod almost to himself. And all this time you knew. I knew who I was, she said. I didn't know what I would find here, but you knew what I didn't know. The simplicity of it broke something in her. Yes, she whispered. His jaw tightened. When I taught you the reporting system, when I warned you about Marissa, when I told you which managers to avoid, were you testing me? No, when I told you about my mother's medical bills, about why I couldn't risk losing this job. Was that part of your investigation? Ethan, No, the denial came too quickly, too full of pain, and for a moment he looked as if he wanted to believe her. That almost hurt worse. "I don't care that you're rich," he said. "I care that I didn't know who I was speaking to. I thought I was helping someone who had no one in this place." "You were," Sophia said. His eyes flashed. She stepped closer, then stopped herself before touching him. She no longer had the right to reach first. "I had power outside this building," she said, each word careful because anything less than truth would be another injury. "But inside that office, I let myself be treated the way others were treated because I needed to see clearly. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect someone to help me without calculation. I didn't expect to feel." Her voice trembled despite her effort. "I didn't expect to become afraid of losing something that had nothing to do with the company." Ethan looked away. For a moment, the executive floor seemed too bright, too clean, too merciless. People were watching them while pretending not to. Sophia had revealed corruption without flinching, but standing before one wounded man, she felt stripped of every title that had ever protected her. "Was any of it real?" he asked. The question was quiet. It was also the one she had feared from the beginning. Sophia answered without hesitation. "All of it." His throat moved. "How am I supposed to know that?" She had no immediate answer. Money could buy investigations, loyalty, silence, buildings that touched the clouds. It could not buy belief from someone you had hurt. Before she could speak, a smooth voice entered from behind them. "Mr. Ward, may I offer a word of advice?" Sophia turned. Victor Hale stood a few feet away, no longer smiling with confidence but with something sharper, meaner. Born from a man cornered enough to wound wherever he could. Security had not yet escorted him out. Perhaps he had been waiting for precisely this opening. Ethan's expression closed. "This isn't your conversation." "Oh, I think it is," Victor said, eyes flicking to Sophia. "After all, you deserve to understand the role you played." Sophia's blood went cold. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to seem intimate while ensuring every word reached Ethan. "People like Miss Laurent don't fall into ordinary lives by accident. They visit them, they study them. Sometimes they even grow fond of them, the way one grows fond of a stray animal that followed them home in the rain." "Stop," Sophia said. Victor ignored her. He looked directly at Ethan. "You were useful to her, honest, humble, conveniently wounded. A perfect reminder that she still has a heart beneath all that power. But don't mistake sympathy for love, Ethan. When this little moral experiment ends, she'll return to her towers, her boardrooms, her world, and you will be remembered as the decent man who made her undercover story feel beautifully human." Ethan went very still. Sophia reached for him with her eyes, silently begging him not to take poison from a poisoned man. But Victor's words had found the one place already bleeding. And for the first time since she had entered her own company under a borrowed life, Sophia Laurent realized that exposing the truth had been easier than proving her heart. For several seconds after Victor's words fell, the conference room seemed to lose all sound. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, pale and indifferent, flattening every face into a version of itself that looked more tired, more exposed. Sophia stood at the end of the long glass table, no longer the quiet junior employee everyone had dismissed, no longer only the founder whose signature could move markets. She was both at once now, and perhaps that was why the silence hurt so much. She had expected shock, she had expected fear, she had even expected anger, but she had not prepared herself for Ethan's stillness. He did not step away from her, he did not accuse her, he did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her with the expression of a man who had opened a door expecting truth and found another locked room behind it. Victor smiled faintly, as if he had won something even in defeat. Sophia turned her gaze toward him, and the softness vanished from her face. "Security will escort Mr. Hale to the private audit room," she said. Her voice was calm, almost quiet, but it traveled through the room with the weight of a gavel. His access to all company systems is suspended immediately. Legal will join us within 10 minutes. Victor's smile twitched. Marissa, seated 2 chairs away, had lost all color. The woman who had once laughed loudly enough for entire departments to hear now kept her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles shone white. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat. Miss Laurent, perhaps we should discuss process before we are discussing process, Sophia said, turning to him. For the first time, no one moved. She looked across the room at the managers, team leads, senior staff, the people who had built little kingdoms beneath her name. Some had bullied directly. Some had benefited silently. Some had lowered their eyes because they had once been bullied too, and survival had taught them to become furniture. Sophia had come undercover to collect evidence. She had gathered more than files. She had gathered the weight of every forced smile in the pantry, every stolen report, every employee who stayed late because leaving on time was treated like laziness, every junior worker who apologized before speaking. And she had gathered Ethan's kindness, which now lay between them, bruised by the shape of her lie. I want every employee in this building notified, she said. All departments. Mandatory town hall in 1 hour. Mr. Bennett stared. 1 hour. Yes, must Laurent, with respect. Restructuring at this scale requires planning, messaging, stakeholder. With respect, Mr. Bennett, fear did not require planning when you allowed it to become policy. His mouth closed. Lena Ortiz, sitting near the far wall, looked up. Her eyes were wet but steady. She had been one of the few people who had not looked away when Sophia was humiliated. One of the few who had documented quietly, who had sent copies of altered reports to an external drive, because she did not trust the company's internal channels. Sophia gave her the smallest nod. Then finally, she looked at Ethan. He was standing near the door, half in shadow beneath the cold office light. For weeks, he had shown her how to survive here. Which printer jammed if you loaded it too quickly. Which spreadsheet formulas Marissa used to hide work she had stolen. Which executives pretended not to understand cruelty as long as quarterly numbers looked clean. He had taught her the hidden map of her own company, and she had never told him she owned the land beneath his feet. Ethan, she said softly. His eyes flickered, but he did not answer. There were too many people watching, too many ears waiting to turn tenderness into gossip or weakness into strategy. So Sophia swallowed the words that belonged only to him and faced the room again. Until the audit is complete, no employee is to delete files, alter communications, or contact subordinates regarding testimony. Anyone found pressuring staff will be terminated for cause. A murmur moved through the room like the first crack in winter ice. Sophia continued. Marissa Vale, you are suspended pending investigation into harassment, retaliation, and misappropriation of work product. Marissa stood too quickly, her chair scraping the floor. This is absurd. Everyone here knows I was just doing my job. If people couldn't handle standards. Standards do not require humiliation, Sophie said. Leadership does not require cruelty, and competence does not need to steal credit from interns and analysts to prove itself. Marissa's eyes flashed toward Ethan. So this is about him. He tells a sad little story, and suddenly, this is about documented behavior across 3 years, Lena said from the wall. The room turned toward her. Lena's voice trembled at first, then strengthened. Calendar invites changed to exclude junior staff. Presentations edited after submission. Performance reviews downgraded after employees objected to unpaid overtime. I have copies. Marissa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, Sophia saw not arrogance in her face, but terror. Not repentance. Not shame. Only the fear of someone discovering that the rules she had used as weapons could now be used against her. Security arrived for Victor. He did not struggle. Men like Victor rarely did when the room was full. He adjusted his cuffs, lifted his chin, and looked once more at Ethan as he passed. Sophia saw the glance. Ethan did too. The wound deepened without a sound. The town hall began at 3 o'clock under the same fluorescent lights that had witnessed so many small defeats. The entire subsidiary gathered in the open workspace. Analysts near the windows, assistants clustered by the filing cabinets, developers standing awkwardly with paper cups of coffee, reception staff lingering near the back, as though uncertain whether they were allowed to occupy the same space as executives. Sophia stood before them without a podium. She had worn simple clothes that morning, because she had entered as one of them. Now, without jewelry, without visible armor, she looked almost more powerful. Not because she seemed untouchable, but because she did not hide from their eyes. "My name is Sophia Laurent," she began. "Many of you know that now. Many of you are angry that I entered this company under another name and role. You have the right to be." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I came here because the reports I received did not match the resignations, complaints, and anonymous letters crossing my desk. I wanted facts untouched by management summaries. I found them." Her gaze moved over the employees slowly. "I also found people trying to survive a workplace that rewarded silence more than skill." No one spoke, but faces changed. A receptionist pressed her lips together. A young man from operations looked down quickly. An older woman near accounting wiped one eye with the heel of her hand. Sophia's voice softened. "To everyone whose work was taken, whose dignity was treated as optional, whose career was stalled because you refused to flatter the right person, I am sorry. Not as a performance, not as a line prepared by communications. I am sorry because my name was on the building while this happened inside it." Ethan stood near the side aisle, arms at his sides, expression unreadable. She wanted to look only at him. She forced herself not to. Today, several managers have been suspended pending investigation. An independent ethics firm will conduct interviews beginning tomorrow. Human resources at this location will be rebuilt with outside oversight. Anonymous reporting will no longer disappear into the inbox of the person being reported. A few people exchanged startled glances. Promotions will be reviewed based on documented contribution, not personal loyalty. Every major project from the past 3 years will undergo credit reconciliation. If your work was used, your record will reflect it. If your manager took credit for it, their record will reflect that too. For the first time, a small sound broke through the crowd. Not applause, something quieter. A breath held too long, finally released. Sophia turned slightly. "And I want to begin by correcting one failure publicly." Ethan's eyes lifted. His body went still again, but this time not from Victor's poison. From warning Sophia understood. Recognition given publicly could feel like another kind of exposure, when a person had spent years learning invisibility as a form of safety. She did not dramatize it. She did not make him a symbol. She kept her voice clean, professional, respectful. Ethan Ward's contributions to the Meridian automation recovery, the client retention model, and the Q3 compliance redesign were misattributed in official records. The audit has already confirmed his authorship in key sections. Effective immediately, he is offered the position of Director of Process Integrity, reporting to the Restructuring Board, with full authority to review workflow abuse, credit theft, and operational bottlenecks. The crowd turned toward Ethan. He did not move. A lesser person might have basked in the correction. Ethan looked as if someone had placed a crown on a man who had never asked for anything heavier than fairness. Sophia added carefully, "Mr. Ward has the right to accept, decline, or request different terms after independent counsel reviews the offer. Recognition should never become coercion." That sentence reached him. She saw it in the faint shift of his eyes, the brief loosening of his jaw. The applause began from somewhere in the back. Lena, perhaps. Then another person joined. Then another. It grew not into celebration, but into something more fragile and more sincere, acknowledgement. Ethan lowered his gaze. Sophia did not smile. Her throat hurt too much. By evening, the office had changed and not changed at all. The same desks remained. The same coffee machine blinked for maintenance. The same cheap carpet held the marks of rolling chairs and hurried shoes. Yet everyone walked differently, as if the floor beneath them had been declared real after years of pretending not to feel it. Marissa's office was sealed. Victor's name disappeared from the internal directory. Before sunset, Mr. Bennett spent 2 hours with legal and emerged, looking 10 years older. Sophia remained until most employees left. She signed interim orders, reviewed suspension notices, approved outside investigators, and declined 3 calls from board members who wanted reassurance that the situation could be contained. Contained. The word made her almost laugh. Some things should not be contained. Some rot needed air. At 7:30, she found Ethan in the small break room, the one with the vending machine that swallowed coins, and the window overlooking the alley. He was standing with a paper cup of coffee he had not drunk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office outside had gone quiet, but not peacefully. It was the quiet after a storm had passed through and left every object exactly where it was, yet somehow altered. Sophia stopped near the doorway. "I didn't know if you'd still be here," she said. Ethan looked at the cup in his hand. "I didn't know where else to go." That hurt more than anger would have. She stepped inside, but left distance between them. "The position is real. It wasn't offered because of us. It wasn't offered because I felt guilty. You earned it before I ever arrived." His mouth curved faintly, without humor. "Before Sophia from data entry arrived, you mean?" She accepted the blow because it was true. "Yes." He nodded once. The vending machine hummed between them. "I keep replaying everything," he said. "Every lunch. Every time you asked me how things worked. Every time I thought I was helping someone who had no one in this place." "You were, but you also had everyone," he said, looking at her now. "Lawyers, executives, power, a whole empire behind your silence." Sophia's eyes stung. "I had resources. That isn't the same as having someone." She took a breath. "I lied about my name, my position, my reasons for being here. I can explain the purpose, but I won't insult you by pretending it didn't hurt you. I watched you trust me while I kept the truth from you. Was any of it real?" The question came quietly. Sophia had faced acquisition battles, hostile boards, lawsuits designed to break her, men who smiled while trying to erase her. None of it had frightened her like Ethan's quiet question. "All of it," she said. "The only false thing was the part I thought would protect the truth." He looked away toward the alley window. Outside, the city was turning blue with evening. Office towers lit up one floor at a time, glowing like stacked lives no one fully understood from the street. "I don't know how to stand beside you," he admitted. "Not like this. Today people looked at me and I could hear what they were thinking, that I got promoted because you care about me, that I'm either lucky or bought." Sophia's hands curled at her sides. "Then we slow down," she said. "Professionally, your role goes through independent review. Publicly, I won't use you to soften my image." Privately, her voice faltered. He turned back to her. Privately, she was only a woman who had fallen in love under borrowed fluorescent light, with a man who fixed jammed printers, without being asked, and placed sandwiches beside her keyboard when Marissa buried her in impossible work. A man who had seen her tired and awkward and stubborn, and had not known there were billions behind her name. "Privately," she continued, "I want the chance to earn trust without hiding, but I know wanting isn't the same as deserving." Ethan watched her for a long moment. Then he set the untouched coffee on the counter. "I need time, Sophia." It was the first time he had said her real name without the shock attached to it. It nearly broke her. She nodded. "I'll give it." He picked up his coat from the back of a chair. When he passed her, he paused. "I'm proud of what you did today," he said, almost reluctantly. For them, she closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, he was already walking away. That night, Sophia returned not to her penthouse, but to the small rented apartment she had used during her undercover weeks. The lease was still active. The furniture was plain, the mattress too firm, the kitchen light too yellow. On the counter sat a chipped mug Ethan had once teased her for buying because it was ugly enough to be honest. She stood in the doorway for a long time, surrounded by the life she had borrowed and the feelings that had not been borrowed at all. Her phone vibrated again and again. Board members, legal counsel, Aunt Claire, news outlets. No doubt the story was already spreading. Billionaire founder infiltrates subsidiary, exposes corruption, promotes ordinary employee. They would love the shape of it. They would polish it into myth by morning. But myths did not show the look in Ethan's eyes when trust cracked. Across town, Ethan sat alone on the last train home, his reflection wavering in the dark window. His promotion letter was in his bag, heavy as a verdict. People nearby scrolled through their phones, unaware that his life had been split into before and after beneath office lights that made everyone look a little lonelier. He wanted to believe her. That was the dangerous part. If he did not care, Victor's words would have slid off him. If Sophia had been only a liar, he could hate her cleanly. But memory was not clean. It came back warm, her quiet laugh over bad coffee, the way she listened when others interrupted, the way her hands trembled only after everyone else had stopped looking. His phone buzzed. At first, he thought it might be her, but the number was hidden. The message contained no greeting, no signature, only one sentence that seemed to know exactly where to cut. She chose you because you were useful to her undercover experiment. Don't confuse being studied with being loved. By the time the first employees arrived the next morning, the office had already changed. No one could point to a new wall, a new desk, a new policy posted in the elevator. The fluorescent lights still hummed with their indifferent brightness. The coffee machine still coughed out bitter liquid into paper cups. The printers still jammed. The keyboards still clicked. And the glass conference rooms still reflected people's tired faces back at them. But fear had shifted direction. For months, fear had belonged to those at the bottom, the interns who lowered their eyes when Marissa passed, the assistants who apologized before speaking, the analysts who worked late to protect ideas that would not carry their names. That morning, fear moved upward. It sat in the shoulders of managers who had once laughed too loudly. It trembled in the hands of people deleting chat histories that were no longer safe to delete. And Sophia Laurent walked through the lobby, not as the quiet new hire everyone had pitied or mocked. She did not wear diamonds. She did not arrive with a crowd. Her navy coat was simple, her hair tied back as usual, her steps calm enough to make the silence louder. The security guard, who had nodded at her for weeks without knowing she owned the building, stood straighter and nearly dropped his badge scanner. Sophia smiled at him first. He blinked. "Good mornings, Miss Laurent." The name landed across the lobby like a bell. Behind the turnstiles, Lena Ortiz paused with a folder held to her chest. Her eyes met Sophia's full of worry and relief, but also a question she did not ask aloud. "Did you sleep at all?" Sophia's small shake of the head answered. She had not slept. Not after the board meeting. Not after Victor's forced smile cracked into panic. Not after Ethan left with hurt in his silence and a promotion letter he had not asked for. She had spent the night in her office, coat over her shoulders, reviewing security logs, metadata trails, server access records, and message routing histories with the head of digital compliance. Not because she wanted to win an argument, because persuasion would not be enough now. Ethan had been wounded by secrecy. If she went to him with tears, with explanations, with "I meant well," she would only ask him to believe again while standing on the same uneven ground. He deserved more than emotion. He deserved evidence. He deserved a truth solid enough to stand on without needing her name to hold it up. At 8:42, the anonymous message was traced. At 9:05, Victor Hale's assistant tried to resign by email. At 9:17, Marissa Vale walked into the office wearing a white blazer and the brittle expression of a woman who had practiced innocence in the mirror. At 9:30, all department employees received a calendar invitation. Mandatory all hands, main conference hall 10 a.m. No agenda, except the executive office. The whole floor seemed to inhale and forget how to exhale. Ethan saw the invitation while sitting at his desk, his bag still unopened beside his chair. The promotion letter remained inside, creased at one corner from his grip during the train ride home. He had read the anonymous message at least 20 times. Though it had only one sentence each time, it became less like a message and more like a stain, spreading across memories he had wanted to keep clean. She chose you because you were useful. He hated that it worked. He hated that Victor, or whoever sent it, had understood one fragile thing about him. Ethan had spent years being useful to people who never truly saw him. Useful for fixing broken data. Useful for finishing reports at midnight. Useful for giving Marissa numbers she would present as her own. Useful, quiet, replaceable. Sophia had felt different. That was why the message hurt. When she appeared at the end of the aisle, conversation disappeared in waves. Ethan looked up before he could stop himself. For one suspended moment, she was not the billionaire founder, not the woman from the headlines now spreading across every company chat, not the owner of the signature on the restructure plan. She was the woman who had sat beside him in the archive room under flickering light, sleeves rolled up, asking him why the quarterly variance did not match inventory adjustments. She was the woman who listened like answers mattered. She was also the woman who had hidden the largest truth in the room. Sophia stopped beside his desk, not too close. "Ethan," she said softly. He saw exhaustion beneath her composure. It should not have mattered. It did. Around them, people pretended not to listen with the full force of their bodies. "I won't ask you to trust my words," she said. "Not today." His jaw tightened. "Then what are you asking?" "Then, come to the meeting," Sophia replied. "Listen to what can be proven. After that, you can decide what you think of me." A dozen things moved through his eyes: anger, pain, longing, restraint. He nodded once, almost formally. Sophia accepted it as more than she deserved. The conference hall was too bright. Under the fluorescent lights, no one looked powerful for long. Not Marissa, seated with her back straight and her lips pressed thin. Not Victor, who had been escorted in by legal counsel, his expensive watch flashing every time his fingers against the table. Not Mr. Bennett, pale and silent near the front, discovering too late that passive leadership also left fingerprints. Sophia stood at the center without a podium. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "For the past several weeks," she began, "I worked here under the name Sophia Lane. I accepted an entry-level position in this subsidiary to observe daily operations without executive filtering. What I found was not a department under pressure. It was a culture trained to protect cruelty when cruelty came from rank." The words did not explode, they settled. "That was worse for those who had relied on noise," she continued. "Yesterday, my identity became public inside this company. Since then, attempts have been made to rewrite the purpose of my presence here and to discredit employees who showed integrity before they knew who I was." Ethan looked down. His hands were still, too still. Sophia turned slightly toward the screen behind her. A timeline appeared. Not dramatic, not emotional, just precise. Project files, revision histories, email chains, deleted task assignments recovered from internal servers, performance drafts altered after submission, screenshots from internal chats where Marissa mocked junior employees, by salary band, accent, clothing, education. A murmur passed through the room. Marissa's face changed color. Sophia let them read. No accusation could cut as sharply as someone's own words displayed without decoration. Then the next file opened. The innovation analysis Ethan had built 2 years earlier, the one that had saved a major client renewal. On the left, the original document. Author Ethan Ward, timestamp 1:13 a.m. On the right, the executive presentation submitted 3 days later. Presenter Victor Hale, contributor names removed. Ethan's breath caught before he could hide it. He remembered that night, cold coffee, rain against the windows, Victor standing behind his chair saying, "Good work, but leadership needs to simplify the story." He remembered waiting for acknowledgement that never came, remembered telling himself stability was worth silence. Sophia did not look at him yet. She gave him the dignity of not being watched while his stolen history returned to him. This was not an isolated incident, she said. More records followed: quarterly models, client recovery plans, risk assessments, work bearing Ethan's structure, Ethan's notes, Ethan's logic, later stripped of his name and passed upward. Victor pushed his chair back. "This is being taken out of context." Sophia looked at him then, and the room seemed to cool. "Context has been included, including your messages instructing staff to remove author history before submission." Victor's mouth closed. A few seats away, Lena's eyes shone with quiet fury. Sophia clicked once more. The anonymous message appeared on the screen. Ethan felt something inside him harden, not because he had forgotten it, but because seeing it there, enlarged and exposed, made its ugliness smaller. It was no longer a private poison in his pocket, it was evidence. "Our digital compliance team traced this message," Sophia said. "It was routed through an anonymizing service using company credentials connected to Victor Hale's administrative account. Access logs show the message was drafted at 11:48 p.m. from a device issued to his office." Victor stood. Anyone could have used that account. The head of digital compliance, seated near legal, spoke evenly. "The device required biometric access at 11:46 p.m. No one moved. Victor looked around as if searching for one loyal face in a room he had spent years teaching to fear him. There were none. Sophia's expression did not soften, but neither did she look triumphant. Justice, Ethan realized, did not make her cruel. It made her steady. "What was a suspension yesterday is a termination today," she said. "Victor Hale is terminated for cause, and a formal complaint will be referred for legal review. The findings against Marissa Vale and Mr. Bennett stand as announced. Nothing here changes because a threat arrived in the night. If anything, it confirms why the review had to be thorough." Mr. Bennett lowered his head. Marissa finally broke. "You're doing this because you were embarrassed," she snapped. "Because people treated you like a normal employee and you couldn't handle it." The old Sophia, the hidden Sophia, might have stayed silent to observe what others revealed, but that time had ended. "No," Sophia said. I am doing this because too many normal employees were treated as if dignity was a privilege. I could leave at any time, they could not. That is exactly why this matters." The room went very quiet. Then Sophia turned toward Ethan. He felt everyone's attention move with her, and for a second, he hated it. He did not want to be made into a symbol. He did not want pity dressed as admiration. He did not want to become the man promoted because a rich woman loved him, if she loved him at all. Sophia seemed to understand before he spoke. "Ethan Ward's promotion," she said, "will not be issued as a reward for loyalty to me. It will be reviewed and confirmed by an independent panel, using documented work product, client outcomes, and peer testimony. His contributions predate my arrival. His value does not begin with my recognition of it." Ethan looked at her then. Something in his chest loosened painfully. She did not rescue him by claiming him. She restored the ground beneath his own feet. "Any employee whose work was misattributed may submit records for review without retaliation," Sophia continued. Compensation adjustments and title corrections will be made where evidence supports them. We will also establish anonymous reporting channels outside the chain of command, mandatory management audits, and clear consequences for harassment, disguised as performance culture. A policy announcement should not have felt emotional, yet people were crying quietly in the back row. An intern covered her mouth. Lena wiped beneath one eye and pretended she had not, because for once, power had entered the room and chosen the wounded instead of protecting itself. After the meeting, no one rushed out. They moved slowly, as if the office layout itself had to be relearned. Victor was escorted away. Marissa walked out with her phone clutched in her hand, her face stripped of its practiced brightness. Mr. Bennett remained seated long after others left. Ethan stepped into the hallway, needing air that did not belong to a crowd. Sophia found him near the window by the emergency stairs, where the city stretched beyond the glass in pale winter light. For a few moments she stood beside him without speaking. It was a habit they had built when she was no one important. Silence first, words only when they had earned their place. "I'm sorry," she said at last. He stared at the city. "For lying, for letting you become part of a truth you didn't consent to carry." Her voice trembled, only slightly. "For not telling you sooner, for thinking I could separate the investigation from the people inside it from you." Ethan closed his eyes. There it was again, her refusal to choose the easy apology. She did not ask him to understand her burden. She named his. "I wanted to hate you," he admitted. Sophia's fingers curled at her side, but she did not reach for him. "I know that message." He let out a breath that almost became a laugh, bitter and tired. "It found the ugliest door and walked right in. You were never an experiment to me. I know that now." He turned to her. "But last night, I didn't." Her eyes reddened. In the office beyond them, people whispered. Some pretended not to glance their way. Their relationship, whatever shape it took, would never be entirely private here. Not after the reveal, not after the meeting. Not with her name on the building, and his name finally rising from buried files. But at the window, the space between them belonged only to two people who had met under fluorescent lights, and somehow seen each other clearly. Ethan said, "You scared me because you were the first person in years who made me feel like being seen wasn't dangerous." Sophia's breath caught. "I didn't fall in love with your power," he continued, quieter now. "I didn't even know it existed. I fell in love with the woman who stayed late to check numbers nobody else respected. The woman who looked angry when an intern was humiliated. The woman who drank terrible coffee and still said thank you." A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek before she could stop it. "And I fell in love," she said, "with the man who taught me how people survive in the company I built. The man who protected someone he thought had nothing to give him. The man who had every reason to become bitter and chose decency anyway." For the first time since the night before, Ethan smiled. It was small, unsteady, and real. "That sounds like a dangerous man." "Very," Sophia whispered. He looked toward the office, where Lena was openly watching now, and immediately pretended to examine a plant. Despite everything, Ethan laughed under his breath. The sound warned something Sophia had feared she had lost. He reached for her hand, not because everyone was watching, not because no one was, because choice, when made freely, was the only answer that mattered. Sophia's fingers slid into his, and for once she did not feel the distance between Laurent and Ward, between penthouse and rented apartment, between inherited boardrooms and late trains home. Those things still existed. They would not vanish because two people cared for each other. The world loved hierarchy too much to surrender it after one meeting. But equality did not mean sameness. It meant standing face to face without one person needing to shrink. In the weeks that followed, the company did not become perfect. No real healing ever happened that neatly. Some employees remained cautious. Some managers smiled too much in the new training sessions. A few people who had once laughed with Marissa now spoke loudly about ethics, hoping memory would be merciful. But records were corrected, salaries were adjusted, promotions were reviewed. The first anonymous reports arrived, and this time they did not disappear into the desks of those being reported. Lena joined the culture review committee and became feared in the best possible way because she remembered everything. Other stories surfaced too. Small ones that never made it into any headline. The receptionist with the perfect eyeliner, the one who had looked at Sophia's coat before her face on that first morning, submitted a written statement about the badge system Marissa had once used to track which junior employees arrived a minute late, and how those minutes had quietly followed people into their reviews. She was not punished for it. She was thanked, and for the first time in 3 years, she asked for a raise instead of apologizing for needing one. The 2 employees Sophia had once overheard whispering outside the copy room, the ones who had murmured better her than us, sought her out separately, weeks apart, to admit they had known things and said nothing. Sophia did not absolve them with a speech. She only said that a workplace built on fear taught good people to ration their courage, and that the real test was not what they had failed to do then, but what they chose to do now. One of them began mentoring the newest hires. The other simply stopped laughing at jokes made at someone else's expense, which was smaller and no less real. Derek, who had once suggested Sophia's failures were a training issue, while the room laughed softly enough to deny it later, was moved off client-facing work after 3 separate employees described a pattern of the same casual cruelty aimed at whoever seemed easiest to blame that week. He was not fired. He was given, instead, the slower and more humbling task of rebuilding trust, one project at a time, under a supervisor who did not laugh to his joke. Even the motivational poster near the pantry came down. Excellence begins with ownership was replaced, at Lena's insistence, with nothing. Just a blank space, where people could pin their own notes, complaints, birthday cards, and thanks. It filled up faster than anyone expected. Ethan's promotion was confirmed unanimously by the independent panel. When the announcement went out, Sophia did not send it from her office. She read it at her desk, her temporary desk, the one she kept on the main floor longer than anyone expected, and looked across the aisle at him. Ethan read the email twice, then he looked up. No grand applause followed, only something better. People came to him one by one, with specific memories of work he had done, problems he had solved, kindnesses they had never thanked him for. Recognition, he discovered, was not always thunder. Sometimes it was a line of people quietly returning pieces of your name. That evening, he found Sophia in the empty break room, rinsing her mug. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorway, "billionaires usually have people for that." She glanced over her shoulder. "And senior strategy managers usually don't lurk in break rooms. I'm adjusting to power. You're terrible at it. I learned from a woman who went undercover and got bullied by her own employees." Sophia laughed, and this time the sound did not break halfway through. Outside the windows, the city glowed. Inside, the fluorescent lights still buzzed, but they no longer seemed quite so cold. Ethan walked to her and took the mug from her hands, setting it aside. "Dinner? Is this a date or a management consultation?" "A date," he said. Then, after a pause, "If you're free." There was something careful in the question, and Sophia loved him for it. He did not assume access to her because she had confessed. He did not treat love as a promotion he had earned. He asked, leaving room for her answer. She stepped closer. "I'm free." They left together through the same lobby where she had once entered as a nobody, and returned as a name powerful enough to silence a room. Thomas at security nodded with a smile he tried to hide. Somewhere behind them, someone whispered, and someone else replied, softer this time, with less judgment than curiosity. Sophia knew they would be watched. The billionaire founder and the overlooked employee, the woman who had hidden everything, and the man who had seen enough anyway. Their story would be discussed in elevators, softened in retellings, sharpened by envy, romanticized by strangers who understood neither the ache nor the courage it had required. But as Ethan held the door for her, and then, laughing at himself, let her hold the next one for him, Sophia felt a future begin in the smallest possible way, not with status, not with rescue, not with the glittering distance of wealth, with two people stepping into the evening side by side, equal in dignity, honest at last, and brave enough to be seen. And under the fluorescent lights they were leaving behind, a new order slowly settled into place, imperfect, watched, questioned, but real, while Sophia Laurent and Ethan Ward walked into a relationship the entire company might witness, yet finally belonged only to them.